Yo, what's up everyone? It's Fiction Moon, and today we're checking out, what if Harry awakened as a high elf progenitor at age 5 and every magic suppression charm Dumbledore placed shattered instantly. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Waking. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive had a smell that Harry Potter knew better than any other smell in the world. Dust and old wood and something faintly sour that no amount of Petunia's obsessive cleaning could quite reach. He'd slept in it for as long as he could remember, curled on a thin mattress with a single blanket that was more suggestion than warmth, and he had never once thought to complain about it because he had nothing to compare it to. He was 4 years old, and then, on the morning of the 31st of July, he was 5, and everything changed. It didn't happen with a sound. It didn't happen with a flash of light or a crack of thunder or any of the dramatic signals that might have warned the household that something was coming. It happened the way dawn happens, gradually, and then all at once, and then irreversibly. Harry woke up. Not from sleep. He'd been awake for 10 minutes already, listening to Vernon's heavy footsteps overhead, tracking the man's path from bedroom to bathroom to the top of the stairs where he'd pause and sniff the air like he expected the house to bring him something. Harry knew that pause. It meant breakfast needed to happen soon. What Harry woke up from was something else entirely. It felt, later, like a fist unclenching inside his chest, a fist that had been clenched so long the muscles had forgotten what open felt like. There was a sound like crystal under pressure, high and clear and shattering, and then something vast and cold and brilliant flooded through him from the inside, and Harry sat up straight on his mattress and put both palms flat on the floor and just breathed. The cupboard lit up. Not with fire. Not with electricity. The light came from Harry himself, a soft, silver-white radiance that poured from his skin the way moonlight pours from water, not the source of the light but the medium it moved through. It filled every corner of the cupboard and cast no shadows because it had no direction. It simply was. Harry looked at his hands. They looked the same. Same small fingers, same faded scar on the left palm from when he'd stumbled on the garden path and Vernon had laughed. But they felt different. They felt like hands that belonged to him now, fully and entirely, in a way they hadn't an hour ago. Like being handed back something you hadn't known had been taken. Above him, he heard a gasp. The cupboard door had a crack in it, a thin sliver where the wood had warped slightly from years of summer heat, and through that crack, a thin bar of silver light was leaking into the hallway. He heard soft footsteps. Not Vernon's heavy thud. These were careful. Then Petunia's voice, very quiet, "Oh." Just that. One syllable. And then silence. Harry waited. The light was fading now, settling into him like water soaking into dry ground, and by the time the cupboard door opened, there was nothing to see except a 5-year-old boy sitting cross-legged on his mattress, looking up at his aunt with eyes that were green and brilliant and, for the first time in her memory, completely unafraid. Petunia Dursley stood in the hallway in her dressing gown, holding a mug of tea she'd forgotten she was holding, and she stared at her nephew for a long moment without speaking. She was a thin, long-necked woman with a face that wore disapproval so naturally it had carved itself into lines around her mouth and between her brows. She was not, by any measure, a warm person. She had decided a long time ago that warmth was dangerous, that it led to the kinds of things that had happened to her sister, that the only sensible response to a world full of impossible, terrifying things was to close every door against them and tend your roses and never, ever look too long at the sky. She looked at Harry now, and something moved behind her pale eyes. Something old and buried and not entirely dead. "You're like her," she said. The words came out cracked, like she hadn't meant to say them. "You're exactly," she stopped. Swallowed. "Your eyes are doing something." "I know," Harry said. His own voice surprised him. It was still a child's voice, still small and a little rough with sleep, but there was a steadiness in it that hadn't been there yesterday. "Something happened. I don't know what it was." "I do," Petunia said. She looked down at her mug. Her hand was trembling slightly. I saw it happen to your mother once. She was 6. She woke up one morning and the whole garden bloomed in January and she had no idea she'd done it. A pause. She was so happy. Another pause, longer. I was furious at her for weeks. Harry watched her. He was 5 years old and something ancient was stirring behind his eyes and he had the sense, clear and certain, that this conversation was important in a way that would matter for a very long time. What is it? He asked. What happened to me? Petunia opened her mouth, and then they both heard Vernon on the stairs, that thunderous, deliberate tread, each footstep a declaration, and her expression shut down like a window slamming. Get up, she said. Make the breakfast. She turned and walked away. But she left the cupboard door open. Vernon Dursley was not an unintelligent man. He was obtuse in specific, deliberate ways, he had trained himself to be, because intelligence, he'd found, mostly just showed you things you'd rather not see, and Vernon had a preference for not seeing. He ran a profitable drill company. He understood people in the way predators understand prey. He knew when someone was afraid of him, and he knew how to use it, and it had served him very well for 41 years. He came into the kitchen and found Harry making eggs, and something stopped him in the doorway. He couldn't have said what it was. The boy was doing the same thing he always did, standing on the little step stool to reach the hob, cracking eggs with the methodical care of a child who'd learned young that broken shells in the pan meant no breakfast and possibly worse. The kitchen smelled the same. The morning light through the window was the same flat, gray Surrey light it always was. But something was different. Harry turned around to check the toast, and Vernon saw his eyes, and every hair on the back of his neck stood up at once. What's wrong with your face? Vernon said. Harry looked at him. Nothing's wrong with my face. Your eyes. Vernon took a step into the kitchen, leading with his chest the way he always did when he was asserting something. What did you do to your eyes? I didn't do anything to my eyes. Harry turned back to the eggs. Breakfast will be ready in 5 minutes. Vernon crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and grabbed Harry's shoulder and spun him around, and that was when things went wrong for Vernon Dursley. He had grabbed the boy hundreds of times. He knew exactly how it felt, the thin shoulder, the way the boy always flinched first, always, before whatever came next, that involuntary little pulling away that told Vernon everything he needed to know about the balance of power between them. He had come to rely on that flinch. It was reassuring in the way that all predictable things are reassuring. Harry didn't flinch. He stood completely still under Vernon's hand and looked up at him, and his eyes, which were doing something Vernon genuinely couldn't name, some quality of light behind the green that had no business being there, met Vernon's eyes and stayed there, and Vernon felt, very suddenly, as if he were the one who'd been grabbed. It was not a physical sensation. Nothing happened to Vernon's body. But something in the quality of the air in that kitchen, something in the weight of the attention Harry was paying him, made Vernon acutely aware of himself in a way he did not enjoy, aware of his hand on this child's shoulder, aware of his own breathing, aware of the precise arithmetic of what he had done in this house and to this child over the course of 5 years. He let go. It happened before he'd decided to do it. His hand opened and he stepped back and he had no idea why. The eggs are going to burn, Harry said, and turned back to the hob. Vernon stood in the kitchen and breathed and tried to locate his anger, which was his most reliable tool, which had never once failed him in 41 years. He found it, somewhere. Battered at the edges. He opened his mouth. Listen here, boy, Vernon. Petunia's voice from the doorway was not loud, but it had something in it that made him stop. She was standing with her arms crossed and her tea in one hand, looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face in, he couldn't remember how long. Not disapproval. Something else. Sit down and have your breakfast. He did something, sit down. Vernon sat down. He ate his eggs, which were perfect, and he said nothing, and Harry served Dudley's portion and poured the juice and moved through the kitchen with the quiet competence of a child who had learned to cook before he'd learned to read. But he moved differently now. Vernon kept almost seeing it, some quality in the way Harry held himself, some absolute absence of hurry or anxiety, as if the kitchen were a space he occupied rather than one he worked in. As if nothing in this house could touch him. Vernon ate his eggs and decided, in the deep privacy of his own mind, that this required further consideration. He did not articulate, even to himself, the word that was pressing against the inside of his skull. The word that started with M. He didn't use that word in his own house. He'd been very clear about that. But it was there. 3 days passed. Harry didn't do anything dramatic with them. He cooked and cleaned and weeded the garden and didn't speak unless spoken to, which was the Dursley house rule, and he spent his evenings in the cupboard thinking about the thing that had happened to him with the focused, serious attention of a child who has just discovered that the world is considerably larger than they'd been told. The power was still there. He could feel it the way you feel your own heartbeat, not intrusive, not demanding, just present, a constant low hum at the edges of everything. He was careful with it. Not because he was afraid of it. Because he was curious about it, and curiosity, he'd found, was best served by patience. On the evening of the third day, he was sitting in the back garden watching the light go out of the sky when he noticed the rose at the end of the garden path was dying. It was Petunia's prize rose, a deep red thing she'd cultivated for 3 summers and tended with a ferocity that she never directed at anything else in her life. It was dying from the roots, some blight Harry couldn't name, the petals browning at the edges, the stem going soft. He'd watched it for a week and watched Petunia notice it and not say anything, just press her lips together and look away. Harry looked at the rose for a moment. Then he reached out with the part of him that had no name yet, the vast and humming thing, and touched the plant the way you touch something to check whether it was warm. The rose straightened. The browning reversed. The roots found something, water, or something richer than water, and the petals unfurled, all at once, a deep crimson so saturated it looked almost unreal in the grey evening light. Petunia was standing at the kitchen window. She saw it happen. She didn't say anything. She washed her hands and dried them on a dish towel and looked out at the rose for a long time. Then she looked at Harry, small and cross-legged in the garden, and her expression did something complicated and private. She didn't say anything that night. But when Harry came in, there was a glass of milk on the kitchen table, and when he looked at it and looked at her, she just pointed at it without turning around from the sink. "Drink it," she said. "You're growing." Harry drank it. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Harry knew, when he heard the owl, that it was significant, not from the owl specifically, since he didn't have the context for what owls in daylight meant, but from the quality of Petunia's reaction when she saw it. She went very still at the kitchen window, the way prey animals go still, and then she said, "Go to your cupboard," in a tight, strange voice, and Harry said, "What is it?" and she said, "Cupboard," again, and he went. He heard her open the letter. He heard the pause. He heard her say something very quiet that might have been a name with an L in it, or maybe it was his mother's name, said the way you'd say a name you'd been trying not to say for years. Vernon came home that evening and there was a conversation in the sitting room with the door mostly shut. Harry sat on his mattress and listened to the shape of it through the thin wall, Vernon's voice rising and Petunia's dropping, the specific counterpoint of a marriage where both people had learned each other's instruments. Eventually he heard the word Dumbledore, and then the word Hogwarts, and then Vernon said, "Absolutely not," in his most absolute voice, and Petunia said something very quiet in response, and there was a long silence. Harry waited. The cupboard door opened. Petunia stood there in the thin light from the hallway, looking at him with an expression that had resolved itself into something he didn't have a name for, not kindness, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that acknowledged, maybe for the first time, that he was a person she was looking at and not a problem she was managing. "You're going to get letters," she said. "From a school. A school for people like you." She pressed her lips together. "Like your mother." "When?" Harry asked. Not for years. You'll be 11. She looked at the floor. But I thought you should know it exists. Okay, Harry said. She looked at him. He looked back. The rose outside was still blooming, brilliant and unseasonal in the July evening. She would have loved you, Petunia said, and then she turned and walked back into the house and didn't say another word about it that night or for many days afterward. Harry sat with that for a long time. The thing in his chest, the vast, humming, silver thing, resonated with it in a way that felt like recognition. What Harry didn't know, and wouldn't know for some time, was what the shattering of those suppression charms had looked like from the other side. Albus Dumbledore was in his office at Hogwarts on the morning of July 31st, eating a lemon drop and reading a report about dragon pox outbreaks in the Orkney Islands, when every instrument on his desk that monitored Harry Potter exploded simultaneously. Not figuratively. They exploded. 7 delicate silver instruments, each one specifically tuned to a different facet of the suppression array he'd spent 6 months constructing and placing around the boy's magic, went off like small grenades, one after another in a rapid sequence, pop 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 pop, sending silver smoke and shattered crystal across his desk and into his beard and across Fawkes, who squawked indignantly and shed several burning feathers in protest. Dumbledore sat very still for a moment, looking at the wreckage. Then he picked up his half-eaten lemon drop and placed it carefully in his desk drawer, because he found, suddenly, that he didn't want it anymore. The suppression array was gone. All 7 layers of it, he could feel the absence in the monitoring spells like pressing on a tooth that's been pulled. He'd designed those charms himself, woven them into the wards around Privet Drive, each one calibrated to dampen different magical signatures so that what emerged from the boy's natural magic would seem, to anyone looking, like a modestly gifted child. A survivor. An orphan with a famous lightning bolt scar and a modest aptitude for magic. Not this. Not whatever had just woken up. Because he could feel that, too, now that the dampening was gone. Even at this distance, 340 miles, give or take, he could feel the shape of the power that had just unfolded from that cupboard, and it made his mouth go dry in a way that very few things in 70-odd years of magical life had managed. He'd known about the bloodline. Of course he'd known. It was why he'd chosen the suppression charms in the first place. The Evans family was old, older than they knew, older than they looked, most of them having the good sense or the bad luck to look entirely ordinary for several generations before the thing in the bloodline woke up again. Lily had been exceptional, but her power had been within the expected range of a gifted witch. He'd hoped the progenitor trait had skipped this generation. He was, clearly, wrong about that. He stood up from his desk and walked to the window and looked out over the grounds of Hogwarts, the lake, the forest, the familiar safe shapes of a world he'd tended for decades, and he thought very carefully about what to do next. The boy was 5 years old. He was in a Muggle household with no magical education, no framework, no one to tell him what he was. The power was awake and uncontrolled, and the longer it went unguided the more unpredictable it would become. He needed to go to Privet Drive. He needed to assess. He needed, above all, to see whether the boy could be, not suppressed again. That was clearly impossible. He'd known that the moment the instruments exploded, but shaped. Guided. Directed toward the role that history required of him. He reached for his hat. His hands were almost entirely steady. He arrived the next morning, a Saturday, which he'd calculated would make the approach less disruptive to the Muggle neighbors, and stood at the gate of number 4 and looked at the house that Harry Potter had grown up in, and felt something in his chest that he recognized, after a moment, as guilt. He was good at managing guilt. He'd had a great deal of practice. He opened the gate and walked up the path and knocked on the front door, and it was opened, after a pause, by Petunia Dursley, who looked at him with an expression of complete, bone-deep resignation, as if she'd been expecting this knock for years. "Professor Dumbledore," she said flatly. "My dear Petunia," he said, with the warmth he'd spent a lifetime perfecting. "I wonder if I might come in." "You can stand in the hallway," she said, and stepped back to let him pass. The house was immaculate and airless and smelled of bleach and something floral that fought with the bleach and lost. Dumbledore stood in the hallway and looked around with half his attention and kept the other half on the specific quality of the air in this house, which was unusual. There was something in it. A resonance, like the moment after a bell has rung and the air is still remembering the sound. "Where is he?" Dumbledore asked. "Garden," Petunia said. "He's been in the garden all morning." "Might I, he's 5 years old," she said. "He's not a problem for you to manage." Dumbledore looked at her. She stared back, chin lifted, and he revised several of his assumptions about Petunia Dursley on the spot. He'd always classified her as the manageable variable in the Harry equation, someone who could be relied upon to suppress and minimize, who would ensure the boy remained unaware of his nature, who had, frankly, been doing half his work for him by simply being herself. The woman looking at him now was doing something different. She was being protective. "Of course not," he said gently. "I simply want to see him. To assess how he is." "I'll take you," she said, and led him through the house to the back door. Harry was sitting in the center of the garden on the grass, and he was reading. This in itself was not remarkable, except that the book was a compendium of European wildflowers that Dudley had knocked off a shelf at the library 2 months ago and Petunia had brought home intending to return and had forgotten about, and it was not a children's book, and Harry was not sounding out the words slowly, he was reading the way people read when they know exactly what they're looking for, turning pages with quick purpose and occasionally going back to compare 2 pages side by side. He was 5 years old and he read like a researcher. He looked up when they came out. Dumbledore saw the eyes immediately. He'd prepared himself for them, had reminded himself on the journey here that the progenitor awakening would manifest in the eyes first, had told himself he was ready. He was not, quite, ready. They were so green they almost weren't green anymore, the color of deep ocean water in direct sunlight, a shade that existed in nature but not, usually, in human faces. And there was something behind them. Some quality of attention that was not childlike and was not threatening but was simply, completely, present. The full weight of the thing that had woken up in this boy, looking at him with 5-year-old eyes and seeing, he suspected, considerably more than 5 years of experience should allow. "Hello," Harry said. "Hello, my boy," Dumbledore said. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. I knew your parents." "I know who you are," Harry said. He set the wildflower book down, keeping his thumb on the page. "You came because something broke." Dumbledore felt the back of his neck prickle. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're looking at me like something unexpected happened." Harry tilted his head. "And you seem like someone who doesn't like unexpected things." Dumbledore sat down on the garden bench that was positioned along the back wall, setting his hat on his knee, and took a moment to organize himself. This was important. The first impression. The framework he established now would shape the boy's understanding of what he was and what it meant for years. "Something extraordinary happened to you," he began. "Something that happens to very rare people. You have a gift, Harry, is it high elf magic?" Harry asked. Silence. Somewhere in a tree at the end of the garden, a bird sang 3 notes and stopped. Dumbledore looked at the boy carefully. "Where did you hear that term?" "I didn't hear it anywhere." Harry turned his palm up and looked at it. "It's just what it feels like. Old. Really old. Older than," he paused, searching, the way children do when they're reaching for a word that their vocabulary doesn't quite have yet, older than this house. Older than England. Something that was here before all of it. He closed his hand. "Is that what it is?" "It is," Dumbledore said quietly. "Though I'm surprised, you tried to stop it," Harry said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement, delivered with the calm certainty of someone reporting a weather observation. "There were things on me. Pressing things down. I could feel them come off." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Why?" This was the moment. Dumbledore recognized it with the part of him that had navigated impossible conversations for 60 years. He could feel the shape of the correct answer, the true answer, the answer that would build trust and begin the relationship on honest ground. He could also feel the shape of the strategic answer, the one that positioned the boy correctly, that maintained the necessary framework, that protected the larger plan. He chose something in between, which was, in retrospect, the worst possible option. "I wanted to protect you," he said. "The world is not always kind to those with great power. I wanted to give you time to grow before the world knew what you were." Harry looked at him for a long moment. Those impossible eyes, patient and clear. "You should have asked me," he said. "You were a baby. Then you should have waited until I wasn't." Harry picked up his book. "I'd like you not to do it again." Dumbledore opened his mouth. Closed it. Sat with the extraordinary fact of a 5-year-old speaking to him with the measured certainty of a peer, and found himself without a prepared response for the first time in years. Perhaps decades. "I wouldn't," he said finally. "It would be impossible now, in any case." He paused. The array broke. "I know," Harry said, and turned a page. In his office, 340 miles away, Dumbledore's remaining instruments, the ones not connected to the suppression array, the ones that monitored broader magical signatures across Britain, were registering something. They were registering the fact that the moment Harry Potter's suppression charms broke, the wild magic of Britain itself had shifted slightly. Like a compass needle, responding to a new north. Dumbledore would see this when he returned. He would sit in his chair and look at the readings for a long time. He would think about the progenitor bloodline, the ancient records he'd found in the Hogwarts archives, the accounts from 3,000 years ago of the last time this awakening had occurred, what it had meant, what it had changed. He would think about Tom Riddle, and the prophecy, and the careful architecture of the plan he'd been building for 4 years. He would realize, sitting there in the blue evening light with his instruments humming around him and Fawkes watching him with golden eyes, that Harry Potter was not going to be the weapon he'd planned. That the thing sleeping in this boy had woken up with opinions of its own, expressed in the clean, uncompromising language of eyes that didn't look away and a 5-year-old's voice saying "You should have asked me." He would pour himself a glass of water and drink it slowly and begin, very carefully, to rethink everything. Vernon tried it, 2 weeks after Dumbledore's visit. He'd been building to it. Harry could see it the way you see weather building, pressure changes, certain quality of silence in a room, Vernon not quite meeting his eyes at dinner and then overcompensating by being too loud about something else. He was recalibrating, Vernon was, the way a man recalibrates when his most reliable tool has stopped working. He was looking for a new angle. He found it on a Sunday evening when Petunia was at her sister's, her real sister, not a pretend dead one, a woman called Marge who smelled of dogs and strong spirits, and Dudley was at a friend's house, and it was just the two of them in the house. Vernon came into the kitchen where Harry was washing up after dinner and stood in the doorway and said, in his most deliberate voice, "I've been thinking about your situation." Harry rinsed a plate. "Have you?" "You're a freak," Vernon said. "Your mother was a freak and your father was a freak and whatever happened to you 3 weeks ago is freakish, and I want you to understand that none of that is welcome in this house." Harry set the plate in the drying rack. He was still for a moment, and then he turned the tap off and dried his hands on the dish towel and turned around and looked at Vernon. "I live here," Harry said. "I cook your meals and I clean your house and I weed your garden. I don't think you want to have this conversation." "Don't you dare take that tone." "I'm not taking a tone," Harry said. "I'm being precise." He put the dish towel down on the counter. He was 5 years old and he reached to Vernon's waist and he looked up at him with eyes that made Vernon's neck prickle again, that same awful feeling of being seen. "I don't have to be afraid of you," Harry said, quietly and without cruelty, just stating a fact. "I know that's the thing you want from me. I know that's the part that isn't working anymore." He picked up the last fork and dried it and put it in the drawer. "I'm going to keep living here. I'm going to keep being decent about it. But you should know that when Aunt Petunia gets home, I'm going to tell her we had this conversation." Vernon stared at him. Something in his face was doing battle with itself. "She won't believe you," he said, but his voice had lost something. Some essential weight. "She will," Harry said simply. "She already knows what you're like." He walked past Vernon and out of the kitchen, and Vernon stood there in the too-clean room with the smell of dish soap in the air, and did not follow. Petunia did believe him. She said nothing when he told her, just stood at the kitchen window and looked at the garden for a long time, at the red rose blazing in the evening light. She made him a cup of tea, a child's tea, mostly milk, and set it in front of him without comment. "Thank you," Harry said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just drink it." He drank it. Outside, the sky was going orange and then purple, the colors coming in slow and warm over the Surrey rooftops, and Harry sat at the kitchen table in the house that wasn't quite his home and felt the vast thing in his chest humming quietly, like a current that knows where it's going, patient and utterly certain. He was 5 years old. He had all the time in the world. And somewhere in the architecture of what he was, something was waiting, not for permission, not for a signal, not for someone else to decide what came next. Just waiting for him to grow into it. He finished his tea. Outside, the rose moved slightly in the evening breeze, bright as a coal, burning without burning. Chapter 2, The weight of old names. The next 4 years passed the way rivers pass, not quietly, exactly, but with a kind of inexorable forward motion that made the question of speed irrelevant. Things happened. Harry grew. He was 6 when he learned that the humming in his chest had language in it, not words, exactly, but something older than words, something that lived underneath language the way roots live underneath a lawn. He discovered this by accident, crouching in the back garden on a Tuesday afternoon with a beetle on his finger, watching it navigate the ridge of his knuckle with absolute concentration, and feeling, very suddenly, that the beetle had something to say. Not in sentences. In the way that a small, armored thing moving through a world of enormous and incomprehensible forces has something to communicate simply by the quality of its movement. He sat there for an hour and a half. When Petunia called him in for lunch, his finger was covered in beetles, 12 of them, arranged in a kind of loose geometric pattern, absolutely still. Petunia stood in the back doorway and looked at this for a moment and then said, "Lunch," again, in a tone that had learned to be unsurprised by Harry, and Harry stood up and the beetles dispersed, and that was that. He was 7 when Dumbledore came back. The old wizard arrived on a Saturday morning in March with the rain coming down in grey curtains over the garden and a slightly damp expression that Harry suspected was not caused by the weather. He sat in Petunia's sitting room, which Petunia kept in a state of such aggressive tidiness that sitting in it felt vaguely criminal, and folded his hands over his knee and looked at Harry with those blue eyes that were always doing 2 things at once, the thing you could see and the thing you couldn't. "I've brought you something," Dumbledore said, and produced a book from somewhere in his robes. Harry took it. It was old, genuinely, physically old, the kind of old that smells like dried flowers and something mineral, the kind of old that means the paper was made by hand and the words were copied by someone who cared enough to get every letter right. The cover was plain dark leather and the title, embossed in characters that Harry's eyes adjusted to read the way an ear adjusts to a new accent, said, "Sidhi Ard, a record of the progenitor bloodlines." Harry turned to the first page. The text was dense and antiquated but readable, and a woodcut illustration showed a figure, ambiguously gendered, impossibly tall, standing at the edge of what looked like the sea, with light pouring from their upturned palms. "High Elf Progenitor," Dumbledore said carefully. "The last documented awakening was approximately 3,000 years ago, in what is now Western Ireland. His name was Kieran." A pause. The historical accounts are, varied in their interpretation, but consistent in one respect. Every one of them notes that after his awakening, the magical landscape of Britain changed. Permanently. Harry looked up from the book. What happened to him? Dumbledore's expression did something carefully controlled. He lived a very long life, he said. And shaped a great deal of what came after him. He didn't say more than that, and Harry didn't push, but he noted the evasion with the part of him that noticed things. I thought you should have access to your history. It seemed, another careful pause, only fair. Thank you, Harry said. He looked at the book. Then he looked at Dumbledore. Are you going to keep coming back? If you'll have me, Dumbledore said, and he seemed genuinely uncertain about the answer, which was the most human Harry had ever seen him. Okay, Harry said. But I want to ask the questions. Not you. Dumbledore's mouth curved. A reasonable condition. And I want honest answers. A shorter pause than Harry expected. I will endeavor, Dumbledore said, which was not the same as agreeing, and Harry noted that too. He was 8 when the dreams started. They weren't frightening, exactly. They were vast. He'd close his eyes in the cupboard. Petunia had made noises twice about moving him to Dudley's second bedroom, which Dudley used primarily to store broken toys, and both times Vernon had come home in a bad mood and the subject had died in the kitchen air without resolution, and Harry didn't press it, because the cupboard was his space, small and particular and entirely his, and the moment sleep came, the dreams came with it, enormous and detailed and somehow sequential, like being handed chapters of a book one night at a time. He dreamed of forests that predated every forest he'd seen or read about, forests where the trees were so old they'd stopped growing upward and started growing outward, so that the canopy wasn't a canopy but a ceiling, continuous and dim-lit and alive in the way that things are alive when they've been alive long enough to develop opinions. He dreamed of cities that were built in those trees, structures of pale wood and living stone that grew rather than built, shaped by the same principle he'd used on Petunia's rose, scaled up to the size of civilization. He dreamed of people, tall, clear-eyed, with the particular quality of presence that he was only beginning to recognize in himself, who moved through those cities with the unhurried certainty of beings who understood their relationship to time. And sometimes, in those dreams, he'd turn a corner in one of the tree cities and find a figure standing with their back to him, and he'd know, the way you know things in dreams, without needing to verify, that this was Kieran. The last one. The one 3,000 years ago. Kieran never turned around. He'd stand with his face to whatever the dream's horizon was and sometimes speak, in something that was not quite any language Harry knew but that Harry understood anyway, and what he said was always some variation on the same thing: you are not alone in this. But you are the only one of this. Both things are true. Harry would wake up with the words settled into him like they'd always been there, and go make breakfast. He was 9 when he found Azkaban. Not physically. He found it the way you find a bruise, by pressing somewhere that should be fine and discovering it isn't. He'd been reading one of the books Dumbledore had brought him, a history of wizarding Britain that was dry and institutional and smelled of official disapproval, and there was a chapter on the prison, and he read it, and then he set the book down and sat for a while. He could feel prisons. He hadn't known that until he read the chapter and recognized the sensation, that particular knot in the vast hum of his power, a place where something was wrong in the way that a broken bone is wrong, structurally, fundamentally. He'd felt it since the awakening and assumed it was something about Privet Drive, something about the quality of his own life here, but it wasn't. It was located. Distant. Northward and slightly east and underneath, underground and underwater both, layered in stone and old dark magic and the accumulated psychic weight of thousands of people losing their minds. He read about Dementors. He read about the conditions. He read the clinical, institutional language that the wizarding government used to describe a place where human beings were imprisoned without trial, some of them, without proper process, some of them, by a legal system that had been under considerable stress during and after the war and had made some decisions it was not currently in the mood to revisit. Harry put the book face down on the floor and pressed his palm flat against the floor and reached, very carefully, toward that distant knot. He could feel the prison's wards the way you feel a wall in the dark, by outline, by resistance. They were old, competently made, and designed by someone who understood that the worst thing you could do to a sentient being was remove hope. He moved along them, gently, not pushing. Learning. There were, he counted the presences, the ones that had enough coherent selfhood left to register at this distance. He stopped counting at 40. Some of them barely registered anymore. The Dementors had been thorough. One presence registered differently. It was diminished, badly, in the way a fire is diminished when it's been running on low fuel for years. But the shape of it, the fundamental structure, was still there, still organized around something, some core of memory or identity that the Dementors hadn't managed to hollow out completely. Something bright in its center, even now. Something that, when Harry's awareness brushed it, went very still and then oriented toward him with the desperate precision of a compass finding north. Harry stayed with that presence for a while. Then he went and got the book again and looked up the names. There were several he could find, people who'd been imprisoned in the aftermath of the war. He went through them slowly, cross-referencing with what he'd managed to read about his parents, about that night in Godric's Hollow, about the people who'd been there. Sirius Black. Convicted of killing 12 Muggles and 1 wizard. Convicted without trial, the book noted this in a footnote, as if it were a minor administrative detail. Alleged right-hand man of Voldemort. Imprisoned in the high-security wing. Harry read the account 3 times. Then he read the section about the evidence. Then he read the section about the actual trial, which was very short, because there hadn't been one. He set the book down again. He thought about the presence in Azkaban, that diminished, oriented thing, organizing itself around something it was still holding onto after years in that darkness. He thought about the footnote. He thought about what it meant to be 5 years old and put in a cupboard, which was a very small injustice compared to what he was thinking about, but which had the same essential shape, someone with power deciding that the correct response to a problem was to close a door and not examine what was behind it too closely. He thought for 2 days. Then Dumbledore came for one of his visits, and Harry was ready. Sirius Black, Harry said, before Dumbledore had finished sitting down. Dumbledore went still in a way that was itself informative, not surprised, but something more complicated than surprise. He settled the rest of the way into the chair and adjusted his expression with the care of a man who knows he's being watched closely. What about him? Dumbledore said. He didn't get a trial, Harry said. No. Quiet. He didn't. You knew that. Yes. Harry looked at him steadily. You could have made them give him one. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The rain was at the window again. It rained a lot, the year Harry was 9, as if the sky were working through something. The political situation at the time was complex, he said. The ministry was in a state of significant upheaval. Many things happened in the aftermath of the war that I would, in retrospect, have managed differently. That's not an answer, Harry said. That's an explanation of why you didn't do the right thing. The explanation doesn't change what happened. Dumbledore looked at him, and for a moment something crossed his face, something raw and genuine, something that didn't have the careful warmth layered over it. No, he said. It doesn't. I want to visit him, Harry said. You're 9 years old. I'm aware of that. I didn't say I wanted to go there physically. Harry put his palm flat on the sitting room table between them, a gesture he'd started using when he meant to make something clear. I can feel Azkaban from here. I can feel him from here. I want to do something about it. But I want to know if you'll support it first, because it's going to be harder if I have to work against you at the same time. Dumbledore sat back in his chair and looked at Harry for a long time with those layered blue eyes. Outside, the rain was steady and gray. Inside, Petunia was making sounds in the kitchen that carefully communicated her awareness of the conversation without her presence in it. What are you planning to do? Dumbledore asked. The wards on Azkaban, Harry said, are not as sophisticated as whoever built them thought. They're mostly designed to keep prisoners in. They're not designed against someone coming at them from outside, from a distance, without a body to contain. He paused. If I could move through them without triggering the containment mechanisms, just enough to reach him, to let him know someone's paying attention, it might help. The presence he's organizing himself around, whatever he's holding onto in there, it needs feeding. Things don't hold indefinitely under Dementors without something external to hold on to. Dumbledore was very still. You've been practicing this. I've been learning this, Harry said. There's a difference. Another long silence. Then Dumbledore said, very quietly, he is innocent, you know. Sirius Black. I have believed it for some time. I know, Harry said. I read the evidence. There isn't any. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. So are you going to help me or not? The question hung in the rain-grey room, and Harry watched Dumbledore's face move through something that had the shape of a moral calculation but the texture of something more personal. Something that had lived in him for 8 years and hadn't been comfortable there. Tell me what you need, Dumbledore said. What Harry needed was quiet and time and the particular quality of stillness that came from nobody knocking on the cupboard door for 3 hours. He got all of these, which meant Dumbledore had, somehow, convinced Vernon and Petunia to take Dudley to the cinema, which Harry thought was quite something as a feat of interpersonal management. He sat on his mattress in the dark, actual dark, he'd covered the sliver of the door crack with his blanket, and breathed slowly and let himself go out. It was hard to describe, afterwards, to Dumbledore. The closest he got was, imagine that you are normally aware of yourself as a point in space. A location. Now imagine that the location becomes optional, that you can stretch the point until it's a line, and the line until it's a plane, and the plane until it fills all the available space, and then you become aware of everything that space contains without moving. He moved north and east and slightly under the surface of things. The prison rose up in his awareness like a storm system, cold and enormous and absolutely wrong, the kind of wrong that he felt in his teeth even at this distance. The Dementors moved through it like currents in dark water, and he gave them absolutely no attention, because he discovered early in the practice of this that you got whatever you focused on, and he had no interest in what the Dementors were. He focused on Sirius Black. The presence was right where he'd found it before, in the high-security wing, organized tightly around its core, a small warm thing, like a hand cupped around a candle in the wind. Closer now, Harry could feel the texture of it. The identity. Something quick and sharp-edged and deeply, viscerally loyal to something it thought was gone. There was grief in it like geology, layer upon layer, compressed into stone. Harry pressed in. Not forcefully. The way you press a hand against a window to signal someone on the other side. The presence went rigid. Then, very slowly, it turned. He couldn't speak. Not with words, not at this distance, through this medium. But the contact was real, and he could put things into it the way you put things into a piece of music, shapes, intentions, the fundamental quality of what he was trying to communicate. I know you're here. I know what happened. You're not forgotten. You're not going to stay here. Sirius Black's presence, 8 years destroyed by Dementors and guilt and the dark, reached back toward him with something so raw and desperate it almost broke Harry's concentration. And in that contact, quick as a heartbeat, Harry felt the shape of the man's innocence, not as a legal argument, not as an evidential assessment, but as a felt truth, the way you feel when someone is telling you something real versus when they're performing something. Peter Pettigrew was alive. The wrong man had been imprisoned. The whole architecture of the official story was constructed on a foundation that wasn't there. Harry held the contact for 10 minutes. He poured everything he could into it, certainty, warmth, the unambiguous signal that someone external was paying attention and was not afraid. He felt Sirius Black stop shaking. Felt the man's presence settle into something slightly more solid than it had been, like a wall that's been given one more buttress. Then Harry came back to himself, in the dark cupboard on Privet Drive, and found that he had a headache behind his eyes and his hands were trembling slightly and he was deeply, profoundly angry. Not explosive anger. The cold kind. The kind that knows exactly what it thinks and has time. He sat with it for a while and let it organize itself into something useful. Dumbledore came back at 6. Petunia made tea that she put on the sitting room table with the air of someone setting down something they'd prefer not to be responsible for. Vernon had developed an efficient system of not being in the same room as Dumbledore, which suited everyone. Well? Dumbledore said. He's innocent, Harry said. I know that's not new information to you. But I also know where Pettigrew is. Dumbledore set down his tea. His eyes were very still. What? He's a rat, Harry said. He's been living as a rat for 8 years. The Weasley family, I think, I caught the edge of it in Sirius's memories. Red hair, a large house, several children. Their youngest boy has him. Dumbledore stared at him. Then he did something Harry had never seen him do. He pressed both hands flat on the table and bowed his head for a moment, a gesture that looked like it might be prayer or might be simple exhaustion or might be a man reckoning privately with something he should have done years ago. That is, Dumbledore said carefully, remarkable. You should get him out, Harry said. There's a process, presumably. A trial. He's been there without one for almost 9 years. Yes, Dumbledore said. There is a process. Then start it. Harry looked at him. Please. That last word, the please, was genuine, not soft, not uncertain, but genuine, because Harry had decided some time ago that requests made from a position of power were more meaningful when they didn't sound like demands. He was asking because he wanted Dumbledore to choose to do the right thing. Not because he couldn't apply pressure. He suspected Dumbledore understood this. I will make inquiries, Dumbledore said. The Ministry is not, they will not be eager to revisit the decisions of that period. Then I'll help with that too, Harry said, with the simple matter-of-factness of a 9-year-old who has decided a thing. Tell me what you need. The Ministry of Magic had walls. Wards. Institutional defenses that a visiting 9-year-old child couldn't walk through or touch or address directly. They were, however, not designed with the assumption that someone could feel them from Surrey and apply the particular kind of pressure that Harry applied over the course of the next several weeks, not breaking anything, not going anywhere he shouldn't, just making himself felt. A presence at the edges. An awareness. The persistent, quiet knowledge, for anyone who was sensitive enough to register it, that something extremely old and extremely awake had noticed the file of Sirius Black, prisoner of Azkaban, and found it wanting. 3 of the 6 senior Wisengamot members who reviewed cold cases that spring reported unusual dreams. Nothing threatening. Just vivid. One of them dreamed, repeatedly, about a courtroom with all the chairs on one side of the room empty, and the judge's chair facing a wall. It took 4 months. In December, 2 months before Harry's 10th birthday, Dumbledore sent an owl, an actual owl, which Harry had to intercept at the back garden before Vernon saw it, with a single line, the inquiry has been opened. It will take time. But the door is unlocked. Harry read the note. He read it again. He thought about the presence in Azkaban, slightly more solid than it had been, still burning around its central warm thing, still holding on. He wrote back, thank you. Keep going. He turned 10 in July, and Dumbledore came on his birthday for the first time. He brought a cake, which surprised Harry, and a book, which didn't, and sat in the back garden in the warm afternoon light and watched Harry with an expression that Harry had started to think of as Dumbledore's complicated face, the one he used when he was genuinely moved by something and was also assessing it simultaneously, both things real, the warmth and the strategy present together without either one cancelling the other. You should know, Dumbledore said, that I've begun telling certain people what you are. Trusted people. Why? Harry asked. Because what arrives at Hogwarts in a year's time should not be a complete surprise to those who are responsible for the school. It would be disruptive if they had no preparation. Harry thought about this. He was sitting in the grass, in his usual cross-legged position, which had developed over the years from a comfortable habit into something that looked almost ceremonial, the straight back, the unhurried quality of his stillness. Who are you telling? Minerva McGonagall. Filius Flitwick. And I have sent a communication to the goblins of Gringotts, because your vault there will require some discussion. Harry looked up sharply. My vault. Your family's vault, Dumbledore corrected gently. Your parents left you considerable resources. I have been managing them in trust during your minority. A careful pause. I should have informed you of this sooner. Harry looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light was golden and warm and Petunia's rose was in full bloom and it was all very pleasant, and Harry said, "How long have you been managing it?" "Since your parents died." "That's 10 years. Yes. I'd like a full accounting," Harry said. "When I go to Gringotts." "Of course," Dumbledore said, and if there was anything in his voice other than easy agreement, Harry didn't catch it. But he noted the question for later. "Okay," Harry said. "Who else?" "Severus Snape knows what you are, though I have not yet told him the full extent of Snape," Harry said. The name sat differently in his mouth than the others. He'd read about Snape, a little in various books, more in the margins of things, the way significant people accrue references without intending to. Potions master. Former Death Eater. Was he loyal to Voldemort? The name didn't trouble Harry. He'd noticed that it troubled most wizards he'd met, the ones Dumbledore occasionally brought with him, the visiting academics who'd come to assess the progenitor awakening and left looking slightly shaken, and he'd decided early on that refusing to say a name was an excellent way to ensure the name had power over you. Dumbledore's expression didn't flicker at the name either. He was a Death Eater in his youth. He turned spy for our side before the end of the war. He has carried significant guilt for the role he played in events that led to your parents' deaths. Lily, Harry said. My mother. Yes. Quiet. He loved her. Or something he understood as love. Harry thought about this seriously. He had learned to take everything about Snape seriously, from a distance, in the same way you take seriously a fire in an adjacent building, not your emergency yet, but worth paying close attention to. Will he be a problem at Hogwarts? Dumbledore considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought. He will be an education, he said finally. In several senses. Harry almost smiled. Good, he said. I like an education. Sirius Black was released from Azkaban on the 14th of November, in Harry's 10th year, in a proceeding that was rushed through the Wizengamot with the slightly frantic energy of an institution trying to close a wound before too many people noticed how deep it went. Peter Pettigrew had been found, discovered by an Auror team that Dumbledore had quietly briefed in September, in his rat form in the Weasley home, stunned, transformed back, and placed in ministry custody before anyone could make a scene. He'd confessed within 40 minutes of interrogation, which surprised people who hadn't been paying attention to the quality of the evidence against him and didn't surprise Harry at all. Sirius Black walked out of Azkaban thin as paper and older by 30 years than his actual age. The photograph in the Daily Prophet, which Petunia brought into the kitchen with her lips pressed together and set on the table in front of Harry without comment, showed a man who looked like he'd been put through something machinery adjacent. Dark ringed eyes. Bones visible in his face. But standing. Upright. Looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile but had something alive in it, something that recognized that it was alive and had not entirely reconciled itself to this fact yet. Harry looked at the photograph for a long time. The presence that had been in Azkaban was no longer in Azkaban. He could feel that, the absence of it from that northern cold knot, which was a kind of relief, like a sound you hadn't noticed stopping. And he could feel, dimly, the new location of it, somewhere in London, probably St. Mungo's, being put back together piece by piece. Dumbledore came 3 days after the release. He wants to meet you, Dumbledore said. He's been told, some of what you are. And what you did. What did you tell him? Harry asked. That you're Harry Potter. That you're James's son. That you found him, and that you've been pushing for his release for over a year. Dumbledore looked at him with the complicated face. He cried, he said quietly. Sirius Black, who I have known for decades, cried when I told him what you'd done. I thought you should know that. Harry sat with that for a moment. "When can I see him?" he said. The meeting happened at a house Dumbledore used for sensitive conversations, a flat in London, unremarkable from the outside, layered in wards that Harry could feel the moment the Muggle taxi he'd taken with Dumbledore turned onto the street. Petunia had not been enthusiastic about the outing but had not prevented it, which was her version of blessing. Sirius Black was sitting in an armchair by the window when Harry came in, and he looked up, and Harry stopped. He'd read the photograph and he'd felt the presence and he'd built up a picture in his mind, but the actual person was different from all of those things in the way that actual people always are. Sirius Black was tall, even folded into an armchair, and even now, 3 weeks out of Azkaban, he had a quality about him, some remnant of what he'd been before, some structural elegance, that the Dementors had tried and failed to entirely remove. He looked like a man who had been very nearly destroyed and was in the early stages of discovering that the core of himself was sturdier than he'd assumed. He looked at Harry. His expression went through several things very quickly. "You look like James," he said. His voice was rough, like an instrument that needed tuning. "Around the eyes you look like Lily. But mostly," he stopped. "I know," Harry said. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from Sirius and looked at him steadily. "Are you all right?" Sirius blinked. Then he let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else, a cracked, real sound that seemed to surprise him. "Straight to it," he said. "Are you always like this?" "Like what?" "Like you already know the answer and you're just giving me the chance to say it myself." Harry considered. "Maybe," he said. "Are you all right?" Sirius looked at him, the brilliant, unafraid eyes, the steady quality of presence, the 5-year-old who had woken up as something ancient and had spent 5 years since then becoming, quietly and without drama, himself. Harry met the look without flinching, which was, he'd found, generally the most useful response. "No," Sirius said honestly. "But I'm better than I was." "Good," Harry said. "That's the direction to go." Sirius Black looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light was flat and London grey through the window. Then he said, "Dumbledore told me what you did. How you found me. How you," he stopped again. "I could feel it, you know. Whoever was pressing against the wards. I didn't know who it was but it was," he pressed his lips together. "It was the only thing in 8 years that made me believe I wasn't going to disappear inside my own head." Harry nodded. "You were holding on," he said. "I could feel that too. Whatever you were holding on to was solid enough." "James," Sirius said simply. "And Lily. And," he looked at Harry, "the idea of you, I suppose. Whoever you were going to be." Harry sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "I think I'd like you to know me. Actually know me, not just the idea." Sirius's expression, which had been navigating carefully between grief and relief and something rawer than either, landed somewhere more solid at that. He straightened slightly in his chair. The remnant quality, the structural elegance, steadied. "Yeah," he said. "I think I'd like that too." Outside, London was doing what London always does, proceeding with enormous indifference to individual moments, the traffic and the people and the grey sky pressing forward in all directions, and inside, in a warded flat in a city full of ordinary magic and extraordinary history, Harry Potter and Sirius Black sat across from each other and began. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Some things start quietly. They go further for it. The letter from Hogwarts arrived on Harry's 11th birthday, which was the expected time, and it was different from the expected letter in one specific way. It was written on parchment that was heavier than usual, sealed not with the usual wax but with something that lit faintly when Harry touched it, and Dumbledore, who was there for the opening, looked at it with an expression of barely concealed interest. Inside, alongside the standard list of supplies and the standard welcome, there was a second piece of parchment, separate and sealed independently. Harry broke that seal too. It read, "Mr. Potter, the castle has been made aware of your particular nature. Certain accommodations will be made. The sorting will proceed as normal. We look forward to your arrival. M. McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. What accommodations? Harry asked Dumbledore. The castle itself, Dumbledore said, is a sentient structure. Not fully, not in the way you or I are sentient. But it has awareness, and it has preferences, and it tends to respond to significant magical presences in individual ways. He looked at the letter with something that might have been anticipation. I expect it will be interested in you. Harry looked at the letter. Then he looked out at the garden, at the rose, which had been improbably, unrelentingly in bloom for 6 years now, blazing through every winter and every dry spell without difficulty, as if it had simply decided that the usual rules didn't apply to it anymore. Good, Harry said. I'm interested in it too. Sirius, sitting in the garden with a mug of tea, he'd been at Privet Drive for 3 weeks, which had created several interesting household dynamics, including Vernon developing what appeared to be a nervous condition that manifested as excessive lawn mowing, said, from his chair, first year shopping. I want to come. Obviously, Harry said. Gringotts first, Sirius said. You said you wanted the full accounting. I said that, Harry agreed. He folded both letters and put them in his pocket. The morning light was very good and the rose was red as everything in somewhere distant but approaching, a new part of his life was assembling itself. He could feel it the way he could feel weather, the way he could feel wards on distant walls, the way he'd been able to feel the shape of things since the morning in the cupboard when the crystal broke and the light came through. Big, whatever was coming. Complicated. Old in the bones. He was entirely ready for it. Chapter 3, The Sorting of Stars. Diagon Alley smelled like old wood smoke and something alchemical, a clean, mineral sharpness underneath the surface smells of warm bread from the bakery and the particular burnt sugar scent of Elop's Owl Emporium. Harry stepped through the leaky cauldron into the alley for the first time and stopped for 3 seconds, which was not long enough for anyone watching to know he was surprised, but was exactly long enough for him to take it all in and arrange it. Sirius was at his shoulder. Well. It's smaller than I thought, Harry said. And more crowded. Give it a minute. He gave it a minute. The crowd shifted and thinned and the alley opened up ahead of him, cobblestone and crooked, shops stacked against each other with the cheerful structural logic of a place that had been building on itself for centuries without a plan. Harry felt the magic in it, ambient, domestic, the everyday kind that accumulated in spaces where magical people had lived and worked for a long time. It was warm. Layered. Like a library, not in the sense of books, but in the sense of accumulated human attention. He liked it immediately. Dumbledore was not with them. He'd arranged the trip and then, with his characteristic ability to make an absence feel deliberate, had contrived to have business elsewhere. Harry had noticed that Dumbledore did this when he expected something might happen that he couldn't fully control. He arranged the board and then removed himself from the game so that however the pieces moved, he could respond to the result rather than being caught in it. It was strategic. Harry had decided to stop finding it irritating and start finding it educational. Petunia had come, which had surprised Sirius and not surprised Harry at all. She'd put on her best coat and her most determinately ordinary expression and stood in the back garden while Sirius did the complicated wand work that would let her through the leaky cauldron's enchantments, and she'd stepped through the brick archway into Diagon Alley and said nothing, but her hand went briefly to her mouth, and Harry saw it. She was walking ahead of them now, looking at the shops with the careful non-reaction of someone experiencing something enormous and refusing to be obvious about it. Harry watched her and thought about 6 years of kitchen tea and left open cupboard doors and the rose that was still blooming at number 4, and felt something that was not exactly gratitude but lived in the same neighborhood. Gringotts, Sirius said. He steered them toward the white marble building at the end of the alley with the purposeful energy of someone who has been wanting to have a particular conversation for a while and is glad the moment has arrived. And Harry, let me do the talking at first. Goblins respect process. We go through their process, establish the formal relationship, and then you can take it wherever you want. Okay, Harry said. Sirius glanced at him sideways. That was easy. You know goblins. I don't. It makes sense to defer to expertise. Harry looked at him. I'm not difficult for the sake of it. Sirius considered this. Your father would have had 5 counterarguments before I'd finished the first sentence. My father wasn't me, Harry said, without heat. What was he like? Genuinely. Sirius was quiet for a moment as they climbed the marble steps. 2 armored goblin guards tracked their approach without moving. Brilliant, Sirius said. And aware of it, in a way that was both his best quality and his worst. He grew into it. A pause. He was the best person I knew. He was also, for about 3 years, an enormous prat. When did he stop being a prat? When your mother told him she'd rather date the giant squid. Sirius pushed open the great bronze doors. Come on. Let's go find out what the goblins have been doing with your money. The account manager assigned to the Potter Vault was a goblin named Ragnarok, which was also, apparently, the name of a previous Gringotts director and not this goblin, but Harry did not make that mistake. Ragnarok was old, genuinely old, in the way that conveyed not fragility but density, like wood that's been compressed by time into something harder than stone. He sat across the desk from Harry and looked at him with flat gold eyes that did not warm up when Harry sat down but became, after a moment, sharply attentive. Goblins, Harry had read, could feel magic in the way that birds feel atmospheric pressure, instinctively, physically, as information about the world. He watched Ragnarok register him and watched the goblin's expression do something that wasn't quite surprise, given that Ragnarok didn't seem built for surprise, but was the equivalent of it, a tightening of the stillness, an increase in precision. Potter, Ragnarok said. Not a question. Yes, Harry said. I'd like a full accounting of the estate. Everything since my parents' deaths. Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. Then he opened a ledger. The primary vault contains the liquid assets, 12,000 galleons at current assessment, down from 47,000 in November 1981. His eyes did not move from the ledger, but something in his voice was watching Harry. Withdrawals during the period of trust management include annual maintenance fees, investment management fees, and periodic discretionary allocations of, who authorized the discretionary allocations. Harry said. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Ragnarok said, in his capacity as named trustee. How much, total? Ragnarok named a figure. It was not small. Harry sat with it. Then he said, what were they allocated for? The trust documents do not require specification of allocation purpose for amounts under 5,000 galleons per annum. Ragnarok finally looked up. The Hogwarts School Fund received a significant recurring contribution. Several charitable organizations. And several individual recipients whose names are sealed under trust confidentiality protocols. Harry looked at the goblin steadily. Can you tell me whether any of those individual recipients are currently living at Hogwarts? Not their names. Just whether. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Gold eyes, absolutely still. Then he said, that is a yes or no question with a yes or no answer. Yes, Harry said. Yes, Ragnarok said. Harry nodded once, slowly. He filed it. Not with anger, he had his suspicions, and suspicions needed to be verified before they became accusations, and accusations needed to be made at the right time in the right way or they became grievances, which were just suspicions with bad posture. He'd learned that from Sirius, oddly enough, in 3 weeks of kitchen conversations at Privet Drive where Sirius had talked about his years in Azkaban with the clear-eyed, unsentimental quality of someone who'd had time to process his rage all the way through to the other side. I'd like to visit the vault, Harry said. And I'd like a formal end-of-trust declaration, given that I'll be starting Hogwarts in September. With full asset transfer documentation. Ragnarok made a note. You are not yet of age. The trust does not formally dissolve until your 17th year. I understand. But I'd like to begin the formal review process now. I'd like to be present for any future management decisions. He looked at Ragnarok with the steady green gaze that had been making adults recalibrate since he was 5 years old. I think that's reasonable. Ragnarok looked at him. The gold eyes were doing something, not warming up, goblins didn't do that, but focusing in the way a lens focuses when you bring something interesting into view. It is, Ragnarok said, within your rights as primary beneficiary. He closed the ledger. The vault car will be ready in 5 minutes. Sirius exhaled beside him. Harry didn't look at him. Thank you, Harry said to Ragnarok, and meant it without any of the social oil that usually came with it. Ragnarok looked at him for one more moment. Then he said, so quietly it was nearly under his breath, the mountain recognizes old stone. It sounded like a goblin proverb. Harry didn't ask him to explain it. He didn't need to. The wand was Ollivander's, obviously. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of sawdust and something electric, and Ollivander himself appeared from between the stacked shelves like a man who'd been waiting for a specific appointment in a room full of other appointments, white eyes fixed on Harry with the particular intensity of someone whose entire life had been about recognition. He stopped 3 feet from Harry and just stood there for a moment. I've been expecting you, he said. Not in the prophetic sense, I mean I received a letter from Dumbledore in July that told me you were coming. But also, he tilted his head, in another sense. What sense? Harry asked. The sense that the wood knows, Ollivander said, and turned back into his shelves. Sit down, Mr. Potter. We're going to be here for a while. They were there for 45 minutes. 14 wands. Each one either did nothing or did something inadvisable. The 5th one set the wall on fire in a way that Ollivander regarded with professional interest rather than alarm, and the 9th produced a sound from somewhere inside the shop that Harry suspected was a cabinet falling. Sirius sat in the doorway and watched with the expression of someone who had been surprised and was now not surprised but remained invested. The 15th wand was different. Ollivander brought it out from a box at the back of the shop that was clearly stored separately from the general inventory, older, less uniform, the cedar box held shut with a simple latch rather than Ollivander's usual complex sealing spells. He held it out to Harry with both hands, which was not how he presented any of the others. This one came in through unusual means, Ollivander said. A purchase made by proxy, 30 years ago. The buyer never collected it. He looked at Harry with those white eyes. 11¼ inches. Blackthorn with a core I classified, after some debate, as crystallized high elf resonance, the only material I have ever encountered of its kind. It arrived already made. I don't know who made it. Harry took the wand. The shop went quiet. Not silent, the street sounds were still there, the bustle of Diagon Alley, Petunia's voice somewhere outside saying something terse to a witch who'd bumped into her. But the quality of the quiet inside the shop changed, the way a room changes when the right key turns in the right lock. Something in the wand recognized something in Harry, and responded, and what Harry felt was not the usual described wand spark, not warmth or a shower of sparks or any of the dramatic signals of a correct match. What he felt was completion. The way a sentence feels when the last word is exactly right. He was holding something that had been waiting for him. Specifically for him. For longer than he'd been alive. Ollivander looked at the wand. Looked at Harry. Looked at the wand again. Remarkable, he said softly. The buyer who purchased this wand 30 years ago, I never knew their name. They paid in full and left an instruction. Hold it for whoever comes asking for it. Just that. His voice had gone very quiet. No one came asking for 30 years. And then Dumbledore sends me a letter in July and I knew, he stopped. Do you know who made it? Not yet, Harry said. He looked at the wand in his hand, dark wood, smooth, slightly warm, sitting in his grip as if it had been made for that specific hand. But I think I'll find out. They left the alley at 4 in the afternoon with Harry's trunk magically reduced in Sirius's pocket, his wand in its box in his own, and a barn owl that Sirius had bought over Harry's mild objection and named, your father's worst quality, which was sentimentality, which was not a name, technically, but the owl seemed to have accepted it. Petunia walked with them to the archway and stood in it and looked back at the alley for a moment before stepping through. "Did you get what you needed?" she said, to Harry specifically. "Most of it," he said. She nodded once, crisply. "Good." She adjusted her coat collar. "Don't tell Vernon about any of this." "Obviously," Harry said. She almost smiled. It was the kind of almost smile that had gotten more frequent over 6 years and still managed to feel significant every time. "Your mother," she said, not looking at him, looking at the brick wall that was just a brick wall again, used to say that Diagon Alley smelled like possibility. She paused. She was right. I always hated that she was right about things like that. Harry looked at her. "You could visit again." "No," she said, firmly. "Then, maybe." Then she walked back through the leaky cauldron and out into the Muggle Street without further comment, and Harry and Sirius exchanged a look, and Sirius mouthed progress at him, and Harry agreed. The 1st of September arrived with the specific quality of weather that seemed designed to make departures feel momentous: early September cold, the sky a clean empty blue, a wind with the first suggestion of autumn in it. King's Cross was exactly as chaotic as every large train station is at any hour, indifferent to the fact that beneath its noise there was a wall between platforms 9 and 10 that didn't exist in the way walls usually exist. Sirius walked him through. Petunia had said goodbye at Privet Drive with a handshake that lasted 2 seconds longer than it needed to and then turned back to the kitchen before Harry had made it to the gate. Vernon had not come downstairs. The Hogwarts Express was red and impossibly solid on the platform beyond the wall, and the platform itself was a controlled chaos of families and trunks and owls and cats and someone's toad that had made a bid for freedom and was being retrieved from under a trolley by a round-faced boy who looked genuinely distraught about it. Harry walked through it and put his trunk in the luggage compartment and found an empty compartment about 2/3 of the way down the train and sat down by the window and watched the platform with the focused observation of someone who knew he was beginning something significant. Sirius had stayed on the platform. He'd wanted to come further, but Harry had said goodbye there, cleanly, because goodbyes worked better when they happened in one location rather than getting extended through multiple rooms like a conversation that doesn't want to end. Sirius had gripped his shoulder and said, "Your parents would be," and then stopped, because it was one of those sentences that was more powerful unfinished, and Harry had nodded and they'd understood each other. The door to his compartment opened 20 minutes into the journey and a girl came in, paused, and looked at him with the expression of someone doing rapid environmental assessment. She was small, with an enormous amount of hair and the particular quality of posture that comes from someone who has spent a great deal of time proving that physical size is not a measure of presence. She had a book under one arm and a cat under the other, a ginger, flat-faced thing that looked like it had grievances, and she looked at Harry's compartment and then at the corridor and then at Harry. "All the other compartments are full," she said. "Or full of people who are being, not good. May I sit here?" "Yes," Harry said. She came in, settled the cat, which expressed its opinion of the situation and then accepted it, and sat down across from him. Looked at him. He looked back. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said. "I've read almost all the textbooks already." "Have you?" She didn't say this competitively. She said it the way people say things when they're trying to figure out whether someone is someone they can actually talk to. "Most of them," Harry said. The Advanced Transfiguration one was interesting. Hermione blinked. "That's not on the first-year list." "No," Harry agreed. She looked at him for a moment. "Where did you get it?" "Dumbledore." "Albus Dumbledore?" "The headmaster." She sat forward slightly. "Why would he give you extra books? Are you especially talented? Is that allowed?" "No, wait, there isn't a rule against it, I checked." She paused. "You have very unusual eyes." "I know," Harry said. "What causes that?" "The color, I mean. It's not a spell, it doesn't have that quality." "It's something." She stopped herself. "Sorry. I do that. I ask too many questions at once. I don't mind, Harry said. What's your cat's name? She looked surprised at the redirect, then pleased, in the way people are pleased when someone notices that they've gone slightly too fast and makes space for them to settle. Crookshanks, she said. The woman at the shop said no one wanted him because he looks bad-tempered. He is bad-tempered. But he's also the most intelligent animal I've ever encountered. She looked at the cat. He likes almost no one. Crookshanks, who had been comprehensively ignoring Harry from across the compartment, chose this moment to stand up, cross the compartment with the deliberate dignity of an animal that does things on its own schedule, and sit down directly next to Harry with an air of having made a considered decision. Hermione stared. He's never done that. He recognized something, Harry said. He looked down at the cat. Crookshanks looked back. Something passed between them in the register that Harry communicated with animals, not language, not even quite thought, but acknowledgement. The cat settled, pressed slightly against Harry's leg, and began to purr. What are you? Hermione asked. Not rudely. The way a scientist asks the question, the way someone asks when they've decided that understanding is worth the directness. Harry looked at her. A first year, he said. Obviously not just that. She had the cat's gaze quality, fixed, precise, prepared to wait. You knew immediately that he recognized something. You didn't say he likes you or that you're good with animals. You said recognized. That's a specific word choice. Harry was quiet for a moment. He assessed her, not the way Dumbledore assessed, not strategically, but the way he assessed things in the garden, in the quality of a plant's life, in the presence of Sirius through distant stone. He felt the shape of her. Brilliant, comprehensive, slightly lonely in the way of people who are too quick for most rooms they walk into. Principled with a capital P. Would not misuse information. Would argue with him directly and relentlessly if she disagreed, which would be, he suspected, frequent. There's a bloodline in my family, he said. Very old. It woke up when I was 5. One of the things it does is, I communicate with things differently than most people. He paused. I'm probably going to be sorted into a house that doesn't know what to do with me. And there will likely be some interesting moments this year. Hermione absorbed this. She absorbed it the way good minds absorb information, not just receiving it but immediately placing it in relationship with everything else she knew, cross-referencing, assessing implications. He watched her do it. High elf progenitor, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I read Sid Heard, she said, with the slight defensiveness of someone used to having their reading called excessive. It's in the Hogwarts library. It's not on any reading list but the bibliography in a history of magic cites it, so I tracked it down. The last awakening was 3,000 years ago. She looked at him. Is that, for the first time, she seemed genuinely uncertain how to continue. Yes, Harry said. She sat with it. That's extraordinary, she said. That's genuinely the most extraordinary thing I've heard since I found out I was a witch, which was itself quite extraordinary. She paused. Do you know what it means? For the wizarding world? The book suggests that a progenitor awakening has historically reshaped things. Significantly. I know, Harry said. I'm working on what I want it to mean. He looked at her. You read the whole book? In 2 days, she said. The old Irish annotations were difficult but there's a translation key in the appendix. Harry looked at her for a moment. Crookshanks purred against his leg. Outside the window, the countryside was opening up beyond London, going green and wide, and the train was finding its rhythm, that specific rocking cadence of the Hogwarts Express that every account he'd ever read mentioned, the feeling of going toward something. I think, Harry said, that we're going to be friends. Hermione looked at him. Then she looked at Crookshanks. Then she opened her book and said, with the studied casualness of someone who is pleased but doesn't want to oversell it, we'll see. They were still talking when a blond boy appeared in the compartment doorway flanked by two others who had the specific quality of people who had organized their personalities around someone else's. Harry had read about Draco Malfoy. Not extensively, his name appeared in the periphery of things, in the social history of Wizarding Britain, in the accounts of the war's aftermath. The Malfoys were old and wealthy and had the particular quality of families who had been important for so long that importance had become their personality. Lucius Malfoy had walked free after the war on the claim that he'd been under the Imperius Curse, which was technically unverifiable and practically suspicious, and had spent the subsequent decade positioning his family for whatever came next. Draco had the family's blonde precision and an expression that was practicing confidence in the way that people practice an instrument, technically accomplished but not yet natural. He looked at Harry and his rehearsed greeting, whatever it had been, stalled. Because Harry looked back at him with the same level, complete attention he gave everything, and Draco Malfoy, who was 11 years old and had been prepared for the famous Harry Potter since he could form sentences, found that his preparation did not account for this. "Potter," he said, recovering. "Draco Malfoy." He put his hand out with the air of someone performing a ritual they've been taught is significant. Harry looked at the hand. He was not hostile. He was simply assessing, openly and without embarrassment, in a way that somehow made Draco's extended hand feel less like an offer and more like a question he hadn't meant to ask. He shook it. "Harry Potter. This is Hermione Granger." Draco's expression adjusted minimally at Hermione. He'd been raised to adjust minimally at Muggleborns, and he did it automatically, and then he caught himself doing it, because the girl was watching him with an expression that catalogued the adjustment exactly as it had occurred, and that was, uncomfortable. "I've heard," Draco said, redirecting to Harry, "that you're something unusual." Beyond the usual, he paused, recalibrating his phrasing in real time. Beyond the boy who lived thing. "My father mentioned that there are people in the wizarding world who believe something significant has awakened." "Your father mentioned it," Harry said. "What do you think?" Draco blinked. He had not been asked what he thought. He was 11 years old and he had been told what to think, and he repeated those thoughts when appropriate, and having someone redirect back to his own opinion rather than engaging with the authority of his father was disorienting. "I think," he said, slower now, "that it matters a great deal who you are, and not just what you are." Harry looked at him for a moment. That was, genuinely, a better answer than he'd expected. "Sit down if you want," Harry said. "There's room." Draco looked at the compartment. Looked at Hermione, who was watching him with the dispassionate attention of someone waiting to see if he'd do something that required an opinion. Looked at his two companions, Crabbe and Goyle, who had no opinions about where they sat and communicated this physically, and then made a small decision that Harry suspected was more significant than it appeared, and sat. The conversation that followed was careful and circling at first and then, gradually, less so. Draco had information, about the wizarding world, about Hogwarts, about the political landscape after the war, that was genuinely useful, even if the interpretive framework it came in was shaped by Lucius Malfoy's worldview, which had specific characteristics that Harry filed and bracketed. Hermione asked questions that stripped the framework away and got to the information itself, with a directness that clearly unsettled Draco and, after a moment, seemed to earn something from him, a reluctant respect that he didn't announce but that showed in the way his answers shifted, becoming less performative and more precise. At one point, somewhere past Birmingham, Draco said, "My father thinks you're going to be dangerous." "To whom?" Harry asked. Draco looked at him. "To people who've been comfortable with the way things are." "Your father's one of those people," Hermione said. "Not unkindly. Just accurately." Draco's jaw tightened. "My father is," he stopped. "Yes," he said, after a pause that contained multitudes. "He is." Harry watched him. There was something real in that pause. Something that had the quality of a door that's been closed for a long time and has, just now, been tried from the inside. "The way things are," Harry said, "is not the way things have to be." He looked at Draco steadily. "That's true for everyone. Including people whose fathers have particular opinions. Draco looked at him for a long moment. The train was moving through the highlands now, the landscape gone purple and vast, the sky coming down in layers. The compartment was quiet except for the rhythm of the rails. Yes, Draco said, quietly. I know. Hogwarts arrived the way it always arrived, from the water, at night, in a fleet of boats that crossed the Black Lake with the specific, slightly magical quality of journeys that are also arrivals and also beginnings all at once. Harry sat in his boat, Hermione beside him, Neville Longbottom across from them with his toad Trevor recovered and held firmly in both hands, and watched the castle emerge from the dark. He felt it before he saw it. That was the thing. He was halfway across the lake when the castle registered him, when whatever ancient awareness Dumbledore had spoken about felt the shape of what was arriving, and something in the stones of Hogwarts, 3,000 years of accumulated magic and history, responded. Harry felt it the way you feel a temperature change, sudden, total, the whole of the air shifting at once. A vibration in the stone beneath the lake, moving through the water, coming up through the wooden boat hull. Hermione, beside him, looked at the water and then at Harry. What's the castle? Harry said. It can feel you. Apparently, Harry said. He looked up at the towers rising out of the dark, and the castle looked back, and it was the strangest greeting he'd ever received, this vast and impersonal recognition from something that had no face and no voice and communicated entirely in the language of resonance. You are here. We remember what you are. We've been waiting, though we didn't know for what. Extraordinary, Hermione whispered. The boats arrived at the stone jetty and the first years climbed out and McGonagall was there, small, precise, with the quality of authority that doesn't need volume, and she looked at Harry when he came up the steps and her expression was, briefly and completely, something that was not in her usual repertoire. Not surprise. Not reverence. Something more complicated. Something that acknowledged what she was looking at without making it larger than it was. Mr. Potter, she said. Professor McGonagall, he said. She nodded once, crisply. The sorting will begin shortly. There are no instructions necessary for what you are, the hat will manage. A pause that lasted exactly the right amount of time. Welcome to Hogwarts. The sorting hat sang. Harry heard the song with the part of him that heard the deeper registers of things. The song was not just words, not just history, not just the usual review of the four houses and their qualities. It was also a frequency. A signal. And when it reached the part about wisdom and courage and ambition and loyalty, Harry felt the hat pause, felt it check something, some quality of the assembled first years, and then continue, but he knew it had noticed. The sorting proceeded alphabetically. Hermione went to Gryffindor with the hat barely on her head, a 5-second sort, which Harry had read was unusual but not unprecedented. She walked to the Gryffindor table with her chin up and sat down with the decisiveness of someone taking possession of the correct seat. Draco went to Slytherin, which surprised no one and seemed, in some complex and private way, to disappoint him, not because he didn't want Slytherin, but perhaps because he'd wanted to be surprised. Neville Longbottom, who had been pale with nerves since the boats, went to Gryffindor, and the hat took a while with him, and when it called Gryffindor Neville looked up with an expression of such genuine astonishment and relief that it made Harry think about what kind of person Neville Longbottom was, underneath the nervousness. People who are truly brave are usually also genuinely afraid. It was the combination that mattered. Then McGonagall said, Potter, Harry, and the great hall went quiet. Not the polite, attentive quiet of each previous sorting. A different quality of quiet, the kind that happens when a room collectively holds its breath. He heard his name moving through the tables in whispers, saw heads turning, saw older students lean toward each other. The famous name. The famous scar. The boy who lived, arrived at last. Harry walked up to the stool and sat down and McGonagall placed the hat on his head. The hat's mind pressed against his, and Harry let it. Most students, from what he'd read, experienced the sorting hat as a voice, clear and slightly surprised by whatever it found, occasionally debating, occasionally asking questions. Harry experienced it differently. The Hat's mind was old and complex and deeply saturated with the knowledge of 11,000 students over 1,000 years, and the moment it made contact with Harry it went absolutely still in a way that suggested it had found something it did not have a category for. "Oh," the Hat said. And then, "Oh." "Yes," Harry said internally. "Take your time. I have sorted 11,412 students," the Hat said, with the slightly dazed quality of a mind rearranging itself. "I have never, in 1,000 years, encountered a progenitor," Harry offered. "Yes. That." A pause. "You understand I must place you in a house." "I assumed so. The difficulty is that you fit all four. Not in the way that genuinely difficult students fit 2 or 3, you actually fit all four, in equal measure, completely. Your bravery is, it seemed to search for the word. Absolute. Not performative. Not chosen. Simply what you are. And your intelligence is," another pause. "You are the third most intelligent mind I have encountered in 1,000 years." "Who were the first two?" Harry asked. "Rowena Ravenclaw herself," the Hat said. "And Dumbledore, though he would be more surprised to hear it than you are. It seemed to settle into something. And your loyalty is the bone-deep kind. And your ambition is the most interesting quality, because it is not directed at any personal elevation. It is directed entirely outward. At a shape of the world you believe is possible." "So which house?" Harry asked. "Gryffindor," the Hat said finally. "Not because it fits you best, it fits you no better or worse than any other. But because what is coming requires you to be in a position of visibility. And Gryffindor is where the story of your family lives, and stories matter, and the shape of the next few years will turn, in part, on how people perceive you." It paused. "I mention this because you should know it's a strategic placement as much as a natural one." "I know," Harry said. "It's fine. You're not surprised." "No." "Remarkable," the Hat said, with something that in a human voice would have been fondness. "Remarkable child. Gryffindor." The table erupted. Harry took the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall, who met his eyes briefly with an expression that said she'd been told what to expect and was finding that description had been inadequate, and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down. Hermione was immediately to his left. "The hat took 40 seconds, she said. "That's the longest this year." "What did it say?" "We had a conversation," Harry said. "About what?" "History. Intelligence. What comes next?" He picked up the pumpkin juice. "It said I'm the third most intelligent mind it's encountered." Hermione stared at him. "Third? Who are first and second?" "Ravenclaw and Dumbledore." She looked affronted. "Where am I on that list?" "It didn't say," Harry said. "But it sorted you in 5 seconds, which I think tells you something." She processed this. "That could mean I was obvious." "It could," Harry agreed. "Or it could mean you were exactly right." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the careful honesty of someone who has decided to trust, "I think this year is going to be very strange." "Yes," Harry said. "But interesting." "Strange and interesting aren't mutually exclusive," she said. "No," he agreed. "They're usually the same thing." Severus Snape was at the staff table, and Harry had been looking at him since the feast started, in the way that Harry looked at things that were complicated, steady, open, not assigning conclusions prematurely. He knew the outline of Snape. He knew the Death Eater history, the spy history, the Lily history, the fact that Dumbledore trusted him and the fact that trust from Dumbledore was not always the straightforward endorsement it appeared to be. He also knew, from the books and the private briefings and the conversations with Sirius who was not objective about Snape and knew it, that this man was going to be the most interpersonally complex relationship of his Hogwarts education. Snape was already looking back at him. Had been, Harry suspected, since before the sorting. Dark eyes, absolutely still, with the quality of someone who is conducting an assessment they've been dreading. Harry held the look for a moment. Not a challenge. Not a greeting, exactly. An acknowledgement. Snape's expression didn't change. But he looked away first. The first potions class was on Thursday morning, and Harry walked in with Hermione and sat at the front bench, the front specifically, not from eagerness but from the practical consideration that the front bench had the best view of what the professor was doing and the worst view of what other students were doing, which suited Harry fine because he found Snape considerably more interesting than his classmates as a subject of study. Snape entered from the back of the room without any preliminary, which was itself a technique. The room had to rotate its attention rather than track an entrance, which immediately established that the space organized around him rather than anticipating him. Harry noted it. There will be no foolish wand-waving in this class, Snape said, which Harry had been told was his opening. He said it with the flat precision of someone reading from an internal script, but with enough genuine conviction underneath that it didn't sound rote. Potions is the most precise of the magical disciplines. It rewards patience, observation, and the willingness to accept that excellence is not achieved quickly. His eyes moved through the room and landed on Harry with a steadiness that was clearly calculated. Potter. Professor, Harry said. I understand you come with a certain reputation. The pause before reputation was doing significant work. I wonder if that reputation extends to basic knowledge. Perhaps you can tell me. And he delivered the question, the one Harry had been told about from Sirius's account of James's time, the prepared question, the one designed to establish that the famous name meant nothing here, that whatever you were in the corridor didn't matter at Snape's bench. Harry answered it. Fully and correctly, and then answered the follow-up that Snape hadn't asked yet, the one that naturally arose from the first answer, which Harry could see Snape assembling in real time, and he gave that answer before the question was spoken. Snape looked at him. The class was very quiet. This was not how this went. The script had a specific shape and this wasn't it. You've read ahead, Snape said. His voice was controlled. I've read the relevant texts, yes, Harry said. But the last part, the application of aconite in combination with boomslang, I worked that out from first principles. It's not in any of the first-year books. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Harry looked back. Not defiantly. Not smugly. Just completely present, the way he was present with everything. Explain the first principles, Snape said. Harry did. Hermione, beside him, was following along with the focused attention of someone who'd read enough to understand what she was hearing but not quite enough to have gotten there herself, and he could feel her recalibrating, building the bridge from what she knew to what she was now being shown. When Harry finished, Snape said nothing for a full 5 seconds. Then, 5 points to Gryffindor. He said it with the specific quality of someone paying a debt they'd rather not have incurred. The class will begin on page 12. Harry opened his book to page 12. Hermione leaned toward him and whispered, he almost smiled. No, Harry said quietly. He almost decided something. She looked at him. What? I'll tell you when I know for certain, he said, and turned his attention to page 12. At the front of the room, Snape was writing something on the board. His hand was entirely steady. But he hadn't looked at Harry again, which was, in its own way, information. The castle above them hummed in its stones, warm, vast, old, paying attention. The light through the dungeon windows was the pale filtered light of deep castle morning, and the first years bent over their benches, and Hogwarts settled around Harry Potter like a hand cupped around something it had been waiting a long time to hold. Outside, somewhere, a term was beginning. Inside, something considerably older than a term was well underway. Chapter 4, What Voldemort Fears. The defense against the dark arts classroom smelled like something had been burned in it recently, and the windows opened onto the wrong side of the castle for morning light, which meant it was always slightly dim regardless of the hour. Professor Quirrell taught from behind a stutter that Harry had noticed, on the first day, was inconsistent. it dropped out entirely when he was thinking about something else, appeared on schedule when he remembered he was supposed to have it, and vanished completely in the 3 seconds after he made a joke, which was exactly backward from how a genuine stutter behaved. Harry had not said anything about this. He was observing. October arrived and brought rain that came at the castle sideways, and the staircases began their seasonal rearrangements, and the first years collectively discovered that Hogwarts was not metaphorically alive in the way that people said beloved buildings were alive, but was actually, genuinely, paying attention. Portraits gave directions. Suits of armor occasionally moved out of the way before you reached them. The trick staircase on the 3rd floor caught Neville twice in the first week, and then, on the 3rd week, it didn't catch him, and Neville stared at it and said, "Did it just?" And Harry said, "Yes," and Neville accepted this with the philosophical resignation of someone who had already had a remarkable amount of unusual things happen to him before breakfast. The castle and Harry had developed, over 6 weeks, what Hermione called an understanding and Harry called a conversation and Neville called Harry talking to the walls again, which was not inaccurate. It wasn't that the castle spoke to him. It was more that it organized itself slightly differently in his presence. Doors that opened with resistance for other students opened without it for Harry, and he never got lost, not once, not even in the shifting architecture of the 7th floor where most first years spent at least one evening walking in circles with increasing desperation. He knew where he was in Hogwarts the way he knew where he was in his own chest, instinctively, completely, because the building recognized him and let him recognize it back. Hermione had decided this was fascinating and was taking notes. Neville had decided this was reassuring and stayed close to Harry whenever the staircases looked unpredictable. Ron Weasley, who had appeared in their lives on the train without being mentioned in the outline of this chapter and had promptly made himself essential through sheer quality of presence, easygoing and sharp in equal measure, with the specific gift of making large, difficult things feel manageable by simply reacting to them with good humor, had decided Harry was, in his words, completely mental but in an interesting way, and Harry had decided that was probably the most accurate description he'd ever received. Draco kept appearing at the edges of their group like a satellite that hadn't yet committed to an orbit. He ate at the Slytherin table and walked to class with Crabbe and Goyle and maintained his family's quality of deliberate distance from anyone he'd been raised to consider beneath him, but twice in the library Harry had looked up and found him 2 tables away, apparently working, and once in the corridors he'd fallen into step beside Harry for 30 seconds and said something actually interesting about the historical relationship between goblin metallurgy and warding theory, and then peeled off toward Slytherin without explanation or farewell. Harry had told Hermione, and Hermione had said, "He's trying to figure out if he can be different from what he was raised to be without anyone noticing," and Harry had said, "He'll figure it out eventually," and Hermione had said, "Or he won't," which was also true. The trap was set on the 14th of October. Harry didn't know it was a trap until he was in it, which was new. He was accustomed to sensing things before they required response. He was in the 3rd floor corridor at 8 in the evening because Hermione had told him she'd seen something through the keyhole of the locked door at the end that she needed to show him, and Hermione's judgment in matters of genuine importance had been reliable enough in 6 weeks that he'd come. Except Hermione hadn't sent the note. He found this out by seeing Hermione in the common room as he was leaving it, deep in a heated argument with Ron about whether the incantation for Wingardium Leviosa was more dependent on wrist movement or intent, and understanding in the same moment that she was not the one who'd summoned him. He kept walking. The 3rd floor corridor was one of the places Dumbledore had made officially off-limits, which Harry had taken as information rather than instruction. He knew what was at the end of it, the 3-headed dog, which he'd encountered accidentally in the 2nd week and which had looked at him and made a low sound that was not quite a growl and let him pass, because the castle had organized the encounter that way and the dog was, at some level, castle. He knew what was beneath the dog, because he'd felt it since his 2nd day at Hogwarts, something powerful and old, wrapped in more layers of protective magic than almost anything else he'd encountered, sitting in the stone beneath this corridor like a heartbeat. What he didn't know was who was ahead of him. He found out at the locked door, which opened when he touched it, which was either the castle helping him or part of what had drawn him here, and he stepped through and stopped. There were 4 of them. Not students. Adults, robed and masked in the way that Death Eaters robed and masked, the silver white of Voldemort's iconography, 2 of them with their wands already out. The room was empty except for the door at the far end, behind which he could feel the sleeping weight of the dog, and a single torch on the wall, and the 4 figures arranged in a loose semicircle in the way that people arrange themselves when they're expecting something to walk into them. One of them spoke. The voice was deliberate, not disguised, he wanted to be heard clearly. Harry Potter. Right on time. Harry looked at them. He felt the castle's awareness sharpen around him, a tightening in the stone, an alertness. "Who are you?" he said. "That's not important," the man said. "What's important is that you come with us quietly. We have instructions to ensure you're not harmed, but those instructions have latitude." "Instructions from whom?" Harry said. "You'll know soon enough." Harry stood in the torchlight and assessed. 4 adults. 4 wands, 2 drawn, 2 hands near wands. The room was roughly 30 feet across. The door behind him was the only exit he was supposed to know about. He was 11 years old and alone. He did not feel afraid. What he felt was the particular, clean clarity that came when a situation resolved itself into simple components. Here is what is, here is what is possible, here is what happens next. He'd felt it before, in smaller ways. This was a larger version. "No," he said. The 2 drawn wands came up. Harry raised one hand, palm out, and the 2 spells that left those wands, a stunning charm and something darker, a red-black color that suggested intent beyond incapacitation, hit the air in front of his palm and stopped. Not deflected. Stopped. In the way that a river stops when it meets a dam, the force still there, pressing against the barrier, going nowhere. He looked at the 4 men over the stopped spells and said, very quietly, "Don't." Silence. One of the men took a half-step backward. The 2 spells dissolved. "What you should do," Harry said, "is tell me who sent you. Then you should leave the castle. If you leave now and tell me what I'm asking, I'll let you leave." He looked at them. "If you don't, I'll make it very difficult for you to leave at all, and then I'll find out anyway." The man who'd spoken was very still. Harry could see through the space in his mask, dark eyes, calculating. He was reassessing. He'd been told the boy was powerful, presumably, because people didn't send Death Eaters to collect an 11-year-old without some preparatory briefing. But there was a difference between being told a thing and standing in a room where that thing was looking at you, calm as deep water, with stopped spells dissolving in the air between you. "You can't fight all 4 of us," the man said. He wasn't certain. But he needed to say it. "Probably not," Harry agreed. He hadn't moved his hand. "But I think you know I can hurt all 4 of you badly enough that fighting won't seem worth it. And I think you also know that if I raise an alarm," he glanced up at the ceiling, at the stones of Hogwarts that were extremely alert right now, paying very close attention, communicating through the material of the building itself, "the castle will have every professor here in about 90 seconds. He looked back at the 4 men. "So let's talk about who sent you." The man who'd been calculating made a decision. Harry saw it happen, the shoulders dropping fractionally, the quality of the face changing behind the mask. He wasn't going to fight, and he was furious about it, and he was going to give up the minimum possible information. "You'll know the name when you're older," the man said. "He knows what you are. He's interested." "Voldemort," Harry said. 2 of the 4 flinched. The speaking man didn't. "Points for him. He has a message," the man said. "A warning. What you are, what you've woken as, is something the wizarding world isn't equipped to understand. He is." A pause. "He's offering guidance. He's offering control," Harry said. "He's hoping I'm naive enough not to know the difference." He looked at the man steadily. "Tell him I received the message. Tell him I said no. And tell him," he paused, finding the right words, words that were true and would communicate exactly what he wanted to communicate, no more and no less, "that I'm not afraid of him, and that if he wants to have a real conversation, he knows where to find me. The man looked at him for a long moment. You're 11 years old, he said. Not dismissively. Something closer to wonder, badly disguised. Yes, Harry said. Imagine what I'll be at 30. He lowered his hand. The corridor's that way, he said, gesturing toward the door. Leave. They left. Not quickly, with the measured pace of people who need the walk to be deliberate because running would mean conceding something. Harry watched them go. The last one through the door paused and looked back, and Harry held the look, and the man looked away first and was gone. Harry stood in the empty room for a moment. The dog behind the far door shuffled and resettled in its sleep. Then he turned around and walked back to Gryffindor Tower and knocked on the frame of the portrait before the fat lady could speak and said, "I need Hermione Granger, please," and the portrait swung open in a way that suggested it had been listening. Hermione's reaction to the story was to listen without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Harry noted it as a measure of how seriously she was taking it. She sat on the bench by the common room window, Crookshanks in her lap, and listened, and her expression moved through several things: concern, fury, rapid analytical assessment, and when he was done she said, "The Philosopher's Stone." Harry looked at her. "It's what's under the dog," she said. "I worked it out last week. Nicholas Flamel, it's in Great Wizarding Discoveries of the 20th Century, which is not on any first-year list, obviously, but it's in the library if you know where to look. He's the only one who ever made one. Dumbledore's guarding it here." She looked at him. "Voldemort wants it." "Of course he does. He wants to come back fully. The stone would give him, not immortality, exactly, but a body. A sustainable one." "I know," Harry said. "I've known since my 3rd day here." She looked at him. "You could feel it." "Yes. And you didn't say anything." "I was watching," he said. "Waiting to see if it was relevant yet. Tonight it became relevant." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "Tell Dumbledore," Harry said. "In the morning. Completely, the men, the message, what I said. All of it." He looked at her. "And then I want to have a proper look at what's down there. Because if Voldemort is sending people here directly, the current defenses they're good, for most threats. But not for this one." Hermione looked at him. "The defenses are built to stop most wizards." "Yes," Harry said. "And I'm not most wizards." She absorbed this with the practicality she brought to everything that had a clear logic. "I'll help," she said. "With whatever needs working out. I've been looking at the protection sequences and the logic puzzle section is quite solvable. Actually, I could do it in about 4 minutes under pressure, but the devil's snare before it would be a problem for most people and the key section is genuinely clever." She stopped. "Sorry. I've been thinking about it for a while." "Why?" Harry asked. She looked down at Crookshanks. "Because I could feel something was coming," she said. "Not the way you feel things. The way I feel things, by looking at the evidence and noticing that the pattern suggests something." Harry looked at her. "You're good at that." "I'm the best at that," she said, without arrogance. "Just accuracy. It's the thing I do." Harry nodded. "Then we'll work together on it." She looked satisfied in the private way she always looked satisfied when something was organized correctly. "We should tell Ron," she said. "Yes. He'll want to help." "He'll be essential," Harry said, which was true, because Ron Weasley had a quality that neither Harry nor Hermione had, the ability to move through dangerous situations with a kind of cheerful practical focus that kept panic from becoming available as an option. He treated impossible situations as problems that needed solving rather than crises that needed surviving, and the distinction mattered enormously in practice. "He's going to be very excited," Hermione said. "And then he's going to pretend he's not excited." "I know," Harry said. He almost smiled. "That's why he's useful." Dumbledore listened to the full account the next morning with his hands folded on his desk and his face arranged in the careful, attentive expression of someone who is hearing things they partially already know and is deciding how much of that knowledge to display. He let Harry finish completely before he said anything, which was one of the things Harry had come to genuinely respect about him, the willingness to actually listen rather than perform listening. "You let them leave," Dumbledore said. "Yes. You could have detained them." "Yes," Harry said. "But detention means interrogation, and interrogation under pressure produces unreliable information. It also would have escalated whatever Voldemort is currently planning in ways I can't fully predict." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "I wanted him to hear a specific message. A man who walked out of Hogwarts on his own feet is more credible as a messenger than one who was dragged out." Dumbledore looked at him with the complicated face. "The message being that I'm not something to be managed," Harry said. "That I know what he wants and I'm not naive about his methods. And that I'm not afraid." He paused. "The last part is the most important. He's spent his entire existence weaponizing fear. If I'm a presence he can't frighten, I'm outside the only framework he reliably operates in." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "You're 11 years old." "You keep not finishing that sentence," Harry said. "What comes after it?" Dumbledore looked at him. Something in the blue eyes was doing something genuine, something that wasn't strategic or layered, that was just a man looking at something that moved him in a way he hadn't expected. "I was going to say," Dumbledore said, "that you are 11 years old and you are the clearest thinker I have encountered in this office since Newt Scamander sat in that chair in 1947. He paused. "And Newt was 31 at the time." Harry sat with that for a moment. "The stone needs better protection," he said. "What's down there is good. It's not enough. It has served, it will stop a competent witch or wizard," Harry said. "Voldemort is not working through competent witches and wizards directly yet. But when he does, when he tries himself, however he manages it, what's there won't hold." He looked at Dumbledore. "I want to add something to it. One layer. Something that isn't a puzzle or a ward or a spell, because he'll solve all of those. Something he can't solve." Dumbledore was very still. "What were you thinking?" "A recognition sequence," Harry said. "High elf resonance. It reads intention the way I read intention, not what someone can do, but what they mean to do. Something that keys to the quality of the purpose behind the approach." He paused. "Voldemort's purpose is completely clear. He'd trigger it within 20 feet. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Outside his window, Fawkes shifted on his perch and made a low, sweet sound that fell into the room like something dropped from a height. "You can construct such a thing?" Dumbledore said. "I can try," Harry said. "I've never built a ward before. But I understand the principle, and Hermione can help me verify the logic structure." "Hermione Granger," Dumbledore said. "You've told her about the stone." "She worked it out herself," Harry said. "She's the second best reader of patterns I've met. After me." He paused. "She's also the most reliable person in this building when it comes to not doing something stupid. She's useful." Dumbledore's expression did the thing it did when he was reassessing, a subtle realignment, visible in the eyes more than the face. "Very well," he said. "I would like to be present when you attempt it." "Fine," Harry said. He stood. "I'll need 2 days to prepare the structure. Can you keep the corridor clear Saturday?" "I can arrange that," Dumbledore said. He paused. "Harry. The message you sent to Voldemort. That if he wants a real conversation, he knows where to find you." He looked up. "Do you mean that?" "Yes," Harry said. "He might." "I know," Harry said. "I have things I'd like to say to him." He left Dumbledore's office and took the stairs down 2 at a time, not because he was in a hurry but because the stairs responded to him, and moving through Hogwarts quickly was always pleasant, the castle adjusting around him, doors and passages arranging themselves, the whole vast structure quietly accommodating the thing it had recognized in the boats and hadn't stopped recognizing since. He felt like a conversation the building had been waiting to have. Saturday was grey and windless, the castle settled into one of its occasional deep silences, and Harry went down to the third floor at 9 in the morning with Hermione's notes under one arm and the blackthorn wand in his hand, and Hermione 3 steps behind him. She'd been working on the logic structure for 2 days with the focused intensity she brought to things that mattered, pages of notation, cross-referenced with everything she could find about high elf resonance magic, which was limited to 3 books and Harry himself, and she'd interviewed Harry about the mechanics for an hour on Thursday evening in a way that was more systematic than most of his conversations with Dumbledore. He'd answered everything precisely, and she'd built the framework from those answers, and the result was a document that was 32 pages long and completely correct. The key thing, she'd told him the night before, spreading the papers on the common room floor, is that the resonance has to be anchored to intention rather than identity. Identity can be faked, there are glamour spells, polyjuice, all sorts. But intention at the level you're describing, the deep structure motivation behind an action, that's harder to disguise because it would require the person to genuinely not want what they want, which is functionally impossible for someone like Voldemort. That's the idea, Harry had said. It's elegant, she'd said, with genuine respect for the elegance rather than the person. Hermione's respect was always for the quality of the thing rather than the person holding it, which was one of the reasons it was worth having. The third-floor corridor was empty. Dumbledore was there, standing near the locked door, and nodded when they arrived. Harry stopped at the door and put his palm flat against it and felt through it, through the door, through the dog, still sleeping, through the trapdoor, down through the succession of enchantments that descended through the stone like layers of sediment, and found the place he was looking for. The space before the first enchantment. The approach. The ward goes here, he said. Before anything else. So that whatever else is there, a person has already passed through this first. He looked at Dumbledore. It won't block them. It's not a barrier. It just reads them. Registers what they're carrying. And then? Dumbledore said. Then if the intention is wrong, the thing they're trying to get to becomes unavailable, Harry said. Not hidden. Just, not reachable. Like trying to pick up a shadow. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. That's an original approach. The ward structures in the books are all physical barriers, Harry said. Locks, enchanted materials, bound creatures. All things that can be overcome by sufficient force or cleverness. He looked at the door. You can't overcome a fundamental misalignment between what you want and what the thing allows. He raised his wand. What happened next was not dramatic in the way that wand magic was usually dramatic, no flash of light, no crack of released power, no visual signature at all. Harry reached through the door with the awareness that could stretch and fill and move through solid things, and in the space behind it he built something the way you build something when you know exactly what it should be, placing each component with the focused intention of someone who has been practicing this, in smaller forms, for 6 years. It took 40 minutes. Hermione stood behind him and very occasionally said a number or a notation reference and twice said, "The third harmonic is slightly off," with the confidence of someone who checked her calculations 4 times, and Harry made the adjustment without breaking focus, and Dumbledore stood aside and watched in the particular stillness of someone witnessing something they don't fully understand but can feel the weight of. When it was done, Harry lowered his wand and exhaled and leaned his hand against the wall because his legs had gone slightly unreliable. The headache behind his eyes was sharper than usual. "Sit down," Hermione said immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "I'm fine," Harry said. "You've gone quite pale," Dumbledore observed. "I'm fine and I'd like to sit down," Harry said, and did, on the corridor floor, which was cold but solid in a way that was welcome. Hermione sat beside him and produced, from somewhere in her robes, a bar of chocolate, which she held out with the practical manner of someone who had researched post-magical effort nutrition the same week she'd researched high elf resonance structures. Harry took it. He was hungry suddenly, ravenously, specifically hungry, the kind of hunger that was the body reporting directly on what had just been spent. Did it work? Dumbledore asked, with the careful patience of someone who is not going to ask if a 9-year-old is all right again. Yes, Harry said, around the chocolate. You can test it if you want. Try to approach the stone from this side, with a purpose that isn't to protect it. Dumbledore looked at the door thoughtfully. Then he said, I'll take your word for it. Probably wise, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him, sitting on the cold corridor floor eating chocolate, 11 years old, with the shadows of extended magical effort under his eyes and the absolute calm of someone who had done exactly what they intended to do, and his expression did something complicated and genuine. Harry, he said, and his voice had lost the careful calibration it usually had. I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it honestly. Harry looked up. All right. Are you afraid? Not of Voldemort specifically. Of what's coming, the shape of it, the size of it. The fact that you are at the center of something that has been building for a very long time. He paused. Even remarkable people are allowed to be afraid. Harry thought about it seriously. He ate the chocolate. He felt the ward behind the door, settled now into the stone, doing quietly and permanently what it had been built to do. He thought about the 4 masked men in this corridor on Tuesday, and the sleeping dog, and the cold fire of Voldemort's interest, which he could feel distantly and had been able to feel for weeks, the way you feel a storm front before it arrives. I'm cautious, he said finally. There are things I don't know yet and things I can't do yet and things that can hurt me. I think about all of those carefully. He looked at Dumbledore. But afraid, no. Afraid means the size of the thing has made you smaller. I haven't let it. He paused. I don't intend to. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Your mother, he said quietly, said something very similar to me once. When she was 17 and we were discussing what it meant that she had come to the attention of certain, dangerous people. He stopped. She wasn't afraid either. She was, precise. About what she cared about and what she would and wouldn't do. He looked away. She was one of the finest people I have ever known. Harry sat with that for a moment. The castle hummed around him, warm and ancient. Tell me more about her, Harry said. Not her magic. Her. And there, in the 3rd-floor corridor outside a locked door, with Hermione sitting very still beside him pretending she wasn't listening to everything, Dumbledore sat down on the corridor bench and talked about Lily Evans Potter for 20 minutes in a voice that had no strategy in it at all. Tom Riddle was not present anywhere in a conventional sense in October of 1991. He existed in fragments, a diary, a curse on an object in a Transylvanian vault, a whisper in 4 different hosts, the Horcrux network of a man who had been so afraid of death that he'd carved his soul into pieces and hidden the pieces across the world like a man burying his valuables before a siege and then losing the map. He was diminished and distributed and desperately, methodically working toward consolidation. He was also, in the part of him that still thought clearly and strategically, aware of a new variable. The report came through Quirrell, filtered, distorted by Quirrell's fragmentary connection to his host's mind, but the essential shape of it was clear. The 4 operatives sent to retrieve the boy had not retrieved him. They had been stopped. Not fought, stopped, which was meaningfully different. And the boy had sent a message. Tom Riddle, in the back of Quirrell's skull, processed this. He had built his entire existence on a specific theorem, that power was the only honest currency, that fear was the purest form of power, and that anything which could be frightened could be controlled. It was a theorem that had served him for 60 years and he had never encountered a genuine exception to it. Some people pretended they weren't afraid. He had methods for the pretenders. But the report from his operatives had a specific quality he hadn't encountered before. It wasn't that the boy had pretended not to be afraid. It was that the men who'd been there, experienced, tested, men who had stood in rooms with him and felt the direct force of his attention, had come back shaken in a way that was clearly not theater. Something in that corridor had made them understand that they were not in the same category of thing as what they'd been sent to collect. Tom Riddle thought about this for a long time, in the dark behind Quirrell's eyes. The progenitor bloodline. He'd known about it theoretically, it was in the oldest texts, the pre-foundation records that most wizarding scholars treated as mythology. He dismissed those records because they were pre-wand, pre-systematic magic, from an era when the measurement of power was imprecise and the record-keeping was unreliable. He was beginning to think he'd dismissed them too quickly. He sent no one else to the third floor. Not immediately. He thought, instead, considered what he knew, what he needed to know, what approach a situation genuinely outside his framework required. He did not tell himself that he was being careful because he was uncertain. He was always careful. It had nothing to do with uncertainty. But that night, Quirrell had a dream he couldn't explain, a dream of very green eyes that looked at him across a great distance without any expression he could name, and in the dream Quirrell tried to speak and found he couldn't, because the eyes were also listening, and whatever they were listening to was more interesting than anything Quirrell might have to say. Quirrell woke up sweating. Riddle, in the back of his skull, did not comment. The owls started in November. Not from Voldemort, not directly, obviously. They came from the Ministry, from the Wisengamot, from 3 journalists at the Daily Prophet, from a woman named Umbridge who held a position in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and who had written Harry a 7-paragraph letter about the importance of proper supervision for young witches and wizards demonstrating unusual magical development. There were 2 from parents of other Hogwarts students, both expressing concern about the dangerous precedent of allowing a child with unregulated abilities to attend school with their children. One, surprisingly, from a Muggle professor of folklore at Oxford who had somehow gotten wind of something and was asking, with academic enthusiasm, about the documented cases of what she called the elder race in the British Isles. Harry read them all. He showed them to Hermione, who organized them into categories with color-coded tags and then wrote a 3-page analysis of the patterns she saw in them, which Harry found genuinely useful. He showed them to Sirius, who came for the 3rd weekend in a row and occupied a guest room in Hogsmeade and wrote back to the ministry officials with the aggressive legal precision of a man who had spent 9 years in prison and emerged with a thorough understanding of exactly which rights could and couldn't be violated and in exactly which ways. He showed them to Dumbledore, who read the Umbridge letter specifically and said, in his most even voice, "I see," which from Dumbledore meant something in the range of "this is a significant problem that I will address and I prefer you not to worry about it," which Harry translated to "this is a significant problem that I am now adding to my list of significant problems and am hoping the others on the list don't interact with it in difficult ways." Harry wrote one response, to the Oxford professor, because the academic sincerity of her letter seemed to deserve acknowledgement. He wrote it carefully and sent it, and she wrote back within the week with 3 follow-up questions that suggested she was considerably smarter than her institution's letterhead implied, and they began a correspondence that Harry did not mention to anyone except Hermione, who said, "That's useful," and Ron, who said, "You're writing letters to Oxford professors." Mental, with the warm admiration of someone who finds mental things admirable. He wrote nothing to Umbridge. He wrote nothing to the ministry. He wrote nothing to the parents. He went to his classes, and worked on his ward sequences in the evenings, and sat with Hermione and Ron and Neville in the common room and did his homework with one part of his attention while another part kept the low, warm conversation going with the castle, and read the 3 books that Dumbledore brought him in November, which were the most complete texts on High Elf progenitor history that the Hogwarts library possessed, and trained. The training was private. He'd found a room on the 7th floor, the castle had shown it to him, specifically, the way the castle showed him things it wanted him to find, that reconfigured itself to whatever was needed. He went there every morning at 5:30 and spent an hour practicing the things he couldn't practice in class, the things that had no structured curriculum because no curriculum had ever been designed for what he was. He pushed the range of the awareness, further, more precise, able to hold more detail at greater distance. He worked on the physical expression of the power, which was rougher and less refined than the awareness work, because he'd been naturally cautious about it. He stopped being cautious. He pushed it until his hands shook and then he ate something and pushed it a bit further, and came back the next day and found the edge had moved. He was not afraid of what he was. He was not hiding what he was. He was simply, methodically, becoming more of it. Quirrell made his move in November, on a cold Thursday when the ground was iron hard with the first frost. Harry felt it from the great hall at dinner, a perturbation in the ward he'd placed, something brushing against it from the corridor side. Something that had a very specific quality of intention. He put his fork down. Hermione looked at him. What? The stone, Harry said quietly. Ron stopped eating. Neville looked up from his shepherd's pie with the expression of someone who has learned that when Harry says something very quietly it is more serious than when other people shout. Now. Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Don't come. He stood up. Absolutely not, Hermione said, also standing. There's something very wrong at the end of that corridor, Harry said. I need you here. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, we're coming in 15, Ron said. Harry looked at him. 20. 17, Hermione said, which was the kind of compromise that accepted neither original position and was better than both, and Harry had time to think that she would be terrifying at any future negotiating table before he left the Great Hall. He was on the 3rd floor in 3 minutes. The corridor was empty, the door to the locked room was shut, and Harry stopped in front of it and put his hand flat on it and felt through it. Quirrell was on the other side. Harry could feel the specific double signature of the man, Quirrell's own presence, frantic and distressed, and beneath it the cold, pressured signature of Riddle, who was directing the approach with the focused precision of someone who has been planning this for months and is not going to be deterred by a door. He was through the dog, asleep, he'd used music, which was in the books, through the devil's snare, through the key room, through the chess set, and he was at the ward. He was pressing against the ward. Harry felt Riddle's presence push against the intention reading field and felt the ward respond, not blocking, just reading, and what it read made the ward light up in every direction at once because what was on the other side was not ambiguous. It was the clearest, most absolute wrong intention Harry had ever encountered. Not evil in a theatrical sense. Something more comprehensive, a purpose so fully oriented toward destruction and domination and the survival of the self at the cost of everything else that it registered like a physical pressure against the ward's surface. Harry pushed back. Not with the ward. Himself, directly. He pressed through the door the way he'd pressed through the walls of Azkaban, the way he'd reached through 300 miles of air and stone to find Sirius, and he put himself between Riddle and the stone. He felt Riddle stop. For a moment, they were in contact, Harry's awareness against Riddle's, no bodies between them, just the pure shapes of two very different minds meeting in the space behind the door. Harry felt the cold intelligence of Voldemort, the absolute precision of it, the way a glacier is precise, enormous and slow and shaped by forces it doesn't choose. He felt the fear underneath it, the genuine and deep and driving terror of death that was the engine of everything else. And Riddle felt Harry. He felt the vast warm thing, older than him, older than Hogwarts, older than wand magic and recorded history and all the frameworks he'd built his understanding on, and he felt the absence in it of the thing he recognized most. There was no fear. Not suppressed fear, not controlled fear. Just, none. The genuine, constitutional absence of it. The thing that had woken up in that boy was too old to be afraid of Tom Riddle because it predated the category of things that Tom Riddle represented. Harry said, in the space between them, you should go. Not I'll destroy you. Not you can't win. Just, go. With the flat, calm authority of someone making a practical recommendation. He felt Riddle withdraw. Not flee, withdraw, with the dignity of an intelligence that has made a strategic decision. But the withdrawal was real. The pressure against the ward eased. Quirrell's double presence moved backward through the enchantments, through the chess set, through the key room, through the devil's snare, and Harry felt it recede from the building entirely within 5 minutes. He stood in the corridor and breathed. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around. Hermione, Ron, and Neville. Hermione had her wand out. Ron was holding his like he meant it. Neville, who was genuinely frightened and had come anyway, was in the back with his jaw set in the particular way of someone who has made a decision they're going to hold to regardless. 11 minutes, Harry said. We were worried, Hermione said. Is it over? Ron said, looking at the door. For tonight, Harry said. Quirrell. Hermione said, because she'd worked that out, clearly, before she'd left the Great Hall. Yes. And behind Quirrell? Harry looked at the door. Behind it, the ward sat quiet and settled in the stone, still alert, still reading, exactly where he'd built it. Yes, he said. Neville exhaled. Right, he said, with the composure of someone who is going to be extremely brave in the future and is currently practicing. Well. Is anybody else hungry? I didn't finish dinner. Ron looked at him. Neville, mate. I was halfway through the shepherd's pie, Neville said. It was a good shepherd's pie. Harry looked at the three of them, Hermione with her wand still out, Ron half laughing despite himself, Neville being entirely and completely Neville, and felt something settle in his chest that was not the vast ancient power. It was something considerably smaller and considerably warmer. The kitchens are on the basement level, he said. I know how to get there without running into anyone. Neville brightened. Harry led them through the castle, which rearranged the relevant corridors with the subtle helpfulness it had been practicing for 6 weeks, and somewhere deep in Hogwarts, in the stone and the wards and the warm old architecture of a building that knew what it was holding, something like satisfaction moved through the rooms. And in the corridor behind them, the ward on the 3rd floor sat quiet in the dark, doing its patient, permanent work. Chapter 5. The Things We Inherit. Christmas at Hogwarts was quieter than Harry had expected and better than anything he'd had at Privet Drive, which was a low bar cleared easily by an empty common room and a fire, and Ron Weasley producing a chess set from his trunk on Christmas morning and setting it up with the air of someone issuing a formal challenge. Most of the students had gone home. Hermione had gone to her parents. She'd hugged Harry at the platform with slightly more force than was strictly necessary and told him she'd hold him if she thought of anything relevant to the stone situation over the break, which was both very Hermione and her version of I'll miss you. Neville had gone to his grandmother's. The Gryffindor common room had a handful of 2nd and 3rd years, and Harry and Ron, who stayed because Harry had nowhere better to be and Ron's family had gone to visit Charlie in Romania and Ron had elected to stay because Harry was staying, which Harry had noted with the private warmth of someone who is still getting used to the idea that people make decisions on his behalf without being asked. They played chess on Christmas morning and Ron demolished Harry thoroughly, which Harry accepted with the equanimity of someone who is excellent at almost everything and has therefore developed the genuine capacity to enjoy things he isn't excellent at. Harry was a thoughtful chess player and Ron was an inspired one, and the distinction mattered enormously. They played 3 games and ate the Christmas feast, which appeared in the common room in covered dishes because someone, the castle, probably, or a house elf acting on the castle's ambient preferences, had arranged it, and it was extraordinary. Harry had presents. This was still, at 11, something that registered. There was a Weasley sweater, hand-knit, deep green, from Molly Weasley who had never met him and sent it anyway, which Ron explained was simply what his mother did. She sent sweaters to anyone she considered insufficiently looked after, and the category was broad. There was a book from Hermione, naturally. Something from Sirius, who'd sent a broom care kit and a letter that ran to 4 pages and contained at least 2 genuine jokes and 1 section that was trying to be practical and kept sliding back into something more personal, and Harry read that section 3 times. There was a package with no note. Plain brown wrapping, his name in an unfamiliar hand. Inside, an invisibility cloak, extraordinarily fine, silver gray and shifting like water, and folded inside it, a single card that said, "Your father left this in my keeping. It is time it was returned. Use it well." Harry held the cloak for a long moment. It ran through his fingers like cool water and he could feel the quality of it, genuinely old magic. Not a charm or an enchantment layered over ordinary cloth but something woven into the nature of the material itself. He didn't need it, not the way it was designed to be used. His own awareness could extend through any wall without him needing to be invisible, but it had been his father's, and that made it something different. Ron, across from him, watched his face. Didn't say anything for once, which was its own kind of gift. "It was my dad's," Harry said. "Yeah," Ron said quietly. "I can tell." Harry folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his trunk, the deep one, next to the Sidhe Ard and the blackthorn wand case and 3 letters from Sirius that he kept because keeping them felt like the correct thing to do. Dumbledore came to Hogwarts on the 27th of December. This was not his usual pattern. He was generally present at the castle, but Harry had learned to distinguish between Dumbledore present as headmaster and Dumbledore present as having something specific to do, and this was the second kind. He was in his office when Harry arrived. He'd sent a note that morning, just, "Come when you have a moment. AD," and he looked up when Harry came in with an expression that Harry had been developing the vocabulary to read over months of practice. This was the guilty one. Not heavily guilty. Not the raw, visible guilt of someone who has just done something terrible. The contained, old kind, guilt that has been living inside a person long enough to become comfortable, to settle into the furniture of the self, to stop being felt as guilt and start being felt as simply the ambient condition of existing. The kind that requires a specific catalyst to surface. Harry sat down. He waited. Dumbledore turned in his chair to face the window. Fawkes was absent from his perch, out on one of his regular flights that coincided, Harry had noticed, with conversations Dumbledore seemed to need space for. "I owe you an explanation," Dumbledore said. "Several, actually. But one in particular that I have been constructing excuses not to give you." Harry looked at him steadily. "All right." Dumbledore turned back from the window. His hands were on the desk, very still, not the practiced stillness of a man managing his presentation but the actual stillness of a man who has stopped managing. "Your mother's family," he said. "The Evans bloodline. I first became aware of its significance when Lily was 11 years old. Not the full significance, I wasn't certain, then. But there were indicators. The quality of her magic was different from what I'd encountered before. Distinctly different. She was more powerful than the raw scores suggested, which meant the power was coming from a source that standard assessment tools weren't measuring." Harry was quiet. He was listening with the complete attention he brought to things that were going to matter. "Over the next 7 years, her time at Hogwarts, I researched the bloodline thoroughly. By the time she graduated, I was certain. The Evans family carried dormant progenitor genetics. Not guaranteed to express, these things are not straightforward, genetically or magically, but present." Dumbledore paused. "In Lily's generation, it hadn't expressed. Her magic was exceptional but structured, contained within known parameters. I thought, I hoped, that it had perhaps skipped this iteration of the bloodline. And then she had me," Harry said. "When you were born," Dumbledore said, "I conducted a standard assessment. What I found was," he stopped. "What I found was unmistakable. The progenitor trait was not dormant in you. It was present and active, even in infancy, and given time it would awaken with the full force of the bloodline." Harry sat very still. "I was afraid," Dumbledore said, and the word cost him something, visibly. "Not of you. Of what it would mean. Of what it would attract. Voldemort was already, we were already at war, and his interest in power, in absorbing and acquiring and consuming sources of magical strength, was absolute. A progenitor child," he shook his head. "He would have come for you immediately. Before you could walk. Before you could have any defense. So you suppressed it," Harry said. "I placed the array when you were 14 months old," Dumbledore said. "With your parents' knowledge and consent. I want to be clear about that. James and Lily knew. They agreed." He paused. "They agreed because they were afraid too, and because I told them it was temporary. That when the war was over, when it was safe, I would remove the array and allow the trait to develop naturally." A longer pause. "The war ended, in the way it ended. I was left as your guardian in all but legal title, and the array was still in place, and I told myself that temporary remained the intention, but that the time was not yet right. That there was still danger. That you needed more time to simply be a child. Harry looked at him. And I kept telling myself that, Dumbledore said, for 4.5 years. His voice was very even, which was how Harry knew it was costing the most. There was always a reason. The Death Eaters who hadn't been caught. The political instability. The possibility of Voldemort's return. And underneath all of it, he looked at Harry directly, which was the first time in the whole conversation he'd maintained the look rather than moving away from it. I was afraid of what you would be when the trait was fully expressed. I had read the records. I knew what the last progenitor had been. And I am an old man who has spent his life believing that he knows best how things should be ordered, and an uncontrollable progenitor was not something I knew how to order. The word uncontrollable sat in the air between them. Harry let it sit there for a moment. I'm not uncontrollable, he said. I'm just not your control. Dumbledore held the look. No, he said. You're not. And I understand now. I understood it the day you were 5 years old and told me I should have asked you, that the distinction is the entire point. He paused. I am sorry, Harry. Not for protecting you, I believe the protection was necessary, though I may have misjudged the duration. But for making decisions about what you were and what you would be without your knowledge or consent. That was wrong. It was wrong in a way I justified for years, and I want to stop justifying it. Harry looked at him. He sat with the full weight of what he'd been told, 4.5 years of his life, a decision made over his head by a man who loved him in the genuine, complicated way that very intelligent and very controlling people love things, and the image of his parents agreeing to it, afraid, trusting the most trusted man they knew to know best. He was not angry in the way he'd sometimes imagined he would be when this conversation happened. The anger was there, a clean, clear thing, but it was not hot. It was not larger than everything else. He had learned, over years in a cupboard that was also the first place he'd woken up as himself, that the most useful thing you could do with a significant feeling was let it exist completely and then ask what it wanted to become. There's more, he said. It wasn't a question. Dumbledore's expression confirmed it. The vault, he said. I have been managing your estate. Some of the discretionary expenditures, some of them went to Hogwarts professors, Harry said. I know. Ragnarok told me what he could. He paused. Was one of them Snape? Silence. Yes, Dumbledore said. Not in the way it might seem. Severus has no salary beyond his teaching stipend, and his circumstances are, he has given more to this war, in ways that are not publicly acknowledged, than almost anyone alive. You thought you'd use my parents' money to compensate someone for his service without asking me, Harry said. And without telling him where it came from. Yes. Harry absorbed this. He thought about Snape, who had been, over the past 3 months, the most consistently complicated presence in his educational life. Snape, who had given him 5 points in the first potions class and had not done so again but had also not been actively hostile, who graded his work with a precision that was nearly aggressive in its fairness, who occasionally looked at him across the room with the expression of a man doing long division in his head. Snape, who had loved his mother in whatever complicated, proprietary way that had become and who carried the consequence of his own early choices with the grim steadiness of someone who has decided that carrying them is the correct punishment. Tell me the full amount, Harry said. Everything that went out of the estate that I should have been consulted about. Dumbledore told him. Harry listened. He didn't interrupt. When it was done, he said, I want to discuss the Snape money with Snape directly. Not to demand it back. To have the conversation that should have happened. He should know where it came from. Dumbledore looked at him. That conversation will not be easy. No, Harry agreed. But it's the right conversation. He looked at Dumbledore. And I want the full accounting from Ragnarok. Everything. And I want control of any future discretionary decisions. Of course, Dumbledore said. Not easily, there was a tightness in it, the tightness of a man releasing something he has held for years, but genuinely. I should have given you that already. Yes, Harry said. You should have. He stood. He was almost at the door when Dumbledore said, Harry. He turned. Your mother, Dumbledore said, she would be proud is inadequate. She would be, he stopped, and this time the stop was not managed, it was simply where the words ran out. She loved you very much. You should know that everything your parents did in those months, all the fear, all the decisions, was organized entirely around making you safe. Harry looked at him. Something in his chest moved that was not the vast ancient power. I know, he said. That doesn't make all the decisions right. But I know that. He paused at the door. Are you all right? Dumbledore looked slightly startled. I beg your pardon. This conversation, Harry said. It looked like it cost you something. Are you all right? The old wizard looked at him for a long moment, looked at this 11-year-old boy who had been told significant things about the management of his own life and had processed them with the clarity of something 3,000 years old, and was now asking after the person who told him. I will be, Dumbledore said. Thank you for asking. Harry nodded once and left. The letter from Petunia arrived on the 30th of December, which was unusual because Petunia did not write letters to Harry at Hogwarts. She'd sent one note in September, brief and functional, checking that the journey had been uneventful, and Harry had replied with equal brevity and they'd maintained the unspoken agreement that their communication did not need to be frequent to be real. This letter was 5 pages long, which told him, before he read it, that something had changed. He read it twice in the privacy of the dormitory, sitting cross-legged on his bed with the curtains drawn. Crookshanks, who had stayed because Hermione had made arrangements, curled against his leg with the warm weight of an animal that knows when proximity is useful. Petunia had found a box. She'd found it in the attic, in the part of the attic that had belonged to her side of things before the attic became primarily Vernon's domain, in a plastic storage container that had been there for 10 years and that she had not previously examined because she had not previously been in a state where examining it felt safe. She had examined it now because Vernon was at Marge's for the week and Dudley was at a friend's, and she'd gone up for the Christmas decorations and found herself standing in front of it with the lid off before she'd decided to open it. Inside, Lily's things. Not all of them, most had gone to Godric's Hollow, destroyed or scattered or lost in the aftermath, but the things Lily had left at her parents' house before she'd moved into her own. Childhood things. Letters. Photographs. A small journal with a hasp that had rusted and released under Petunia's hands without magic, which she noted specifically. And at the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope with Harry's name on it in his mother's handwriting. Petunia had not opened it. She'd sent it inside her letter with a single sentence of her own writing. I don't know what it says. I think it's been waiting for you. Harry held the envelope for a while before opening it. His mother's handwriting was small and rapid, slightly leftward-leaning, the handwriting of someone who thought faster than the pen could move. The letter was dated October 31st, 1981. The day she died. He read it slowly. Harry, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I wrote it this morning in a strange mood that I think was premonition, although I've never had premonitions before and I'm told I'm being melodramatic. Your father rolled his eyes, which is his most expressive gesture. He is currently making you laugh in the next room, which is his specific genius. You laugh like him. You have his hair and my eyes and both of our stubbornness, which doesn't bear thinking about. Dumbledore came yesterday. He's worried about something he won't name directly, which means he's worried about Voldemort knowing where we are. He's reorganizing the Fidelius. I trust him. I also trust him less completely than I used to, which I think is growth rather than loss. I want to tell you things in case I can't tell you later. Here they are. You are not the lightning bolt Scar. You are not the prophecy. You are not whatever the world decides you mean. Those things are real, but they're the frame, not the painting. The magic in our bloodline is very old. Older than wand magic. Dumbledore has been honest with us about what it means, mostly. There are things he hasn't said that I've worked out for myself, things about what you'll be when the trait fully expresses, things about what the wizarding world will make of you. I want you to know, don't let them make you into a weapon. Don't let them make you into a symbol. You can be useful and also be yourself, and if anyone tells you those things are in conflict, they're wrong. Your Aunt Petunia loves you, Harry. In the specific, difficult way that she loves things, which requires her to be angry at them first. Be patient with her. She lost me the same moment she decided to be angry at me for what I was, and she spent 15 years being unable to take the anger back because it would mean admitting she wasted 15 years on it. People who love things they can't show love for are just people who are frightened. You know how to be patient with frightened things. Be kind to your godfather. He's going to need it. Be careful with power. Not afraid of it, careful. The difference is everything. I love you so completely that I'm running out of adjectives. You are the best thing I have ever done, and I did it while simultaneously failing to fold a fitted sheet correctly even once in 7 years of marriage, so I'm reasonably proud of the achievement. Be brave. Not the loud kind. The kind that goes on. Mum. Harry sat with the letter for a very long time. The dormitory was quiet, the winter castle quiet around it, the snow outside the windows filling up the grounds with slow, patient accumulation. Crookshanks purred. Somewhere below, he could hear Ron moving around the common room. He read the letter a third time. Then he folded it very carefully along its original creases and put it in the same pocket of his trunk as the letters from Sirius and the City Yard, and he sat on his bed for another few minutes, and let himself feel the full size of what had just happened. His mother had looked at him, from 10 years away, from the last morning of her life, and told him exactly the things he needed to hear, including the things about the people around him and the things about what he was and the things about being careful versus being afraid. She had known him without knowing him, the way people who love very well can project forward with accuracy along the lines of a thing's essential nature. He was not the frame. He was the painting. He went downstairs and played chess with Ron and lost, again, badly, and the fire was warm and the castle was warm and outside the snow kept coming down, filling everything in with white. Petunia came to Hogwarts in January. Harry had not asked her to. He'd written back after Christmas with a response to her letter, brief, careful, saying what needed to be said without saying more than was ready, and mentioned, at the end, that visitors were possible on weekends if she wanted to see the school. He hadn't expected her to take it up. She arrived on a Saturday in the third week of January, wearing her best coat and an expression of determined normalcy that was managing badly to conceal something considerably more raw underneath it. McGonagall met her at the gates. Harry had arranged this, and brought her to the entrance hall, where Harry was waiting. Petunia stood in the entrance hall of Hogwarts and looked up at the vaulted stone ceiling and the moving staircases and the portraits that were looking back at her with frank interest, and she said nothing for almost 30 seconds. Harry waited. He was good at waiting. It's enormous, she said finally. Yes, Harry said. The portraits are moving. Yes. She pressed her lips together. This is extremely unsettling. It gets less unsettling, Harry said. Would you like to see the grounds? It's cold but clear. Yes, she said. Please. They walked the grounds for an hour, which was long enough for Petunia's shoulder to drop out of its defensive height and for her breathing to settle from the controlled rhythm she used in situations that required management into something more natural. Harry matched her pace, which was long-strided and slightly hurried the way people's gaits are when they're used to having to get somewhere rather than simply walking. He showed her the greenhouses and the edge of the lake, which was half frozen and metallic in the January light, and the Quidditch pitch in the distance, and she asked questions about all of it in the tone of someone who has decided that curiosity is safer than emotion. Then she said, abruptly, "Did you read her letter?" "Yes," Harry said. "Was it?" She stopped. Tried again. "Was it like her?" Yes, Harry said. Exactly. Petunia was quiet for a moment. They were standing at the edge of the lake, watching the ice move slightly where the water beneath it was still circulating. The cold was sharp and clarifying. She wrote to me too, Petunia said. Not a letter I found in a box. She owed me, that October. Not long before, she stopped. I didn't write back. I was still in the middle of being angry at her. Her voice was very even, which meant it wasn't, underneath. I have thought about that every day for 10 years. Harry looked at her. He didn't say it wasn't your fault because it partially was, and Petunia knew that, and saying otherwise would be a kindness that she'd recognize as false, and false kindnesses were not what this conversation needed. She knew you loved her, Harry said instead. She told me. In the letter. Petunia looked at the ice. She said you love things in a difficult way, Harry said. That you have to be angry at things first. She wasn't angry at you about it. She just, he paused, finding the right word, understood it. Something in Petunia's face moved. Not dramatically, she wasn't a dramatic person, her grief had the same quality as her love, contained and slightly angular, managed rather than expressed. But it moved. She was always better at understanding things than I was, Petunia said, very quietly. She had an advantage, Harry said. She could feel what people were carrying. The magic helped with that. He looked at his aunt. You have a version of it, you know. Less developed. But it's there. Petunia looked at him sharply. I don't have magic. Not wand magic, Harry said. But the bloodline is on both sides of your family tree. You got the muted version. The thing that makes you read a room accurately when you walk in, that makes you know when something's wrong before anyone said it. He paused. Have you ever thought about why you were always right about Vernon, even when you were defending him? You knew exactly what he was. You chose him anyway, which was your decision. But you always knew. Petunia stared at him. I'm not saying it to upset you, Harry said. I'm saying it because it's true and because I think you've spent your whole life being afraid of the part of yourself that knows too much about things, and that's, he paused, a waste. Of something real. Silence. The lake moved beneath its ice. You sound like her, Petunia said. The words came out slightly broken and she controlled them immediately, but Harry heard them. Good, he said. They stood at the lake for a while longer. A giant squid tentacle broke the surface briefly, regarded them, and submerged. Petunia looked at it with an expression that cycled rapidly through shock, absurdity, and resigned acceptance. There's a giant squid, she said. Yes, Harry said. It's friendly. Of course it is, she said. And then, quietly, with the absolute private quality of something she hadn't planned to say, I'm sorry, Harry. For all of it. The cupboard and all of it. He looked at her. She was still looking at the lake, chin up, eyes slightly bright. I know, he said. It's all right. It isn't, really, she said. But thank you for saying it. You left the door open, Harry said. 6 years ago. You left the cupboard door open the morning it happened, when you could have pretended you didn't see anything. That was a choice. She was quiet for a moment. It seemed like the least I could do. It was the beginning, Harry said. That's enough. They walked back up to the castle for lunch, and Petunia ate in the great hall with Harry on one side and Ron on the other, and Ron was entirely natural with her in the way Ron was entirely natural with everyone, and Hermione arrived late and sat across from them and treated Petunia with the courteous, interested respect she gave adults who seemed to be people worth talking to. Petunia answered questions and asked some and ate what was on the table without commenting on the fact that it had appeared rather than been cooked and served. Before she left, at the gates, she put her hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, not the awkward non-contact she usually managed, but an actual, deliberate placement of her hand, and said, "Write more often." "You too," Harry said. I'll try, she said. That's the most I can promise. That's plenty, Harry said. She walked back through the gates and down the lane toward Hogsmeade, and Harry watched her go, straight-backed and long-strided, and felt the vast old thing in his chest resonate with something that was very specifically human and very specifically his. He went to Snape the next evening. He knocked on the potions office door at 6 o'clock and waited. He heard a pause inside that was longer than the time needed to simply stop what you were doing and come to the door, a pause with the quality of a decision being made, and then Snape's voice, "Come." The office was exactly what the office should be, stone walls lined with ingredient jars, a desk covered in essay parchments with Snape's corrections in red-black ink, a single lamp that cast everything in the amber light of a space designed for close work. Snape was standing rather than sitting, which was either a coincidence or not. He looked at Harry with the particular Snape expression, controlled, layered, the surface presenting indifference over something considerably more complex underneath. "Potter," he said. "It's past regular hours." "I know," Harry said. "I have something to tell you. I wanted to tell you in person." Snape said nothing. He waited. "The discretionary expenditures from my family estate," Harry said. "Dumbledore told me about them. Some of them were directed to you." He looked at Snape steadily. "Supplementary income, over the past 10 years. Snape's expression went through something and came out the other side very still. "I see," he said. "I wanted you to know it was my family's money," Harry said. "Not Dumbledore's. And I wanted you to know that I don't want it back." He paused. "My mother would have wanted it that way. I think you know that." The stillness on Snape's face was the kind that happens when someone is working very hard not to let their face do what it wants to do. Harry watched it with the open, steady attention he gave everything, not trying to interpret it and not looking away from it. "Albus had no right," Snape said, very quietly. "To make that decision without." "No," Harry agreed. "He didn't. But the decision was made. And what I'm telling you is that I'm ratifying it, from my end. The money was given and I'm not taking it back, and the reason is that someone who risked what you risked deserves compensation that a teaching stipend doesn't cover." He paused. "That's all I wanted to say." Snape looked at him. There was something moving behind those dark eyes, something that didn't have any of the performance in it that Snape's expressions usually had, that was simply the raw material of a man being told something he didn't know how to receive. "Your mother," Snape said, and stopped. "I know," Harry said. He gave it space. Snape looked at the desk. The lamp flickered. Outside the potions office, Hogwarts breathed in its ancient, patient way. "She would have been," Snape started again. "She was the only person who looked at me the way you look at things," he said, with the difficulty of someone pulling words from somewhere they don't usually come from. Just, directly. Without deciding what she was going to see before she looked. "I know," Harry said again. "She was like that in her letter too." Snape looked up sharply. "She wrote, she left something. For me. My aunt found it." A silence. Snape looked away again. When he looked back, he had the expression of a man who has arranged his face into something functional and is holding it there by main force. "Was it?" He stopped. "Was she well, when she wrote it? The last, at the end?" "She was herself," Harry said. "Completely." Something in Snape's face eased, very slightly, in the way a long-held breath eases when it finally releases. "Good," he said. "That is, good." Harry nodded. He turned to go. "Potter," Snape said. He turned back. "Your potions work this term," Snape said, returning with visible effort to the surface of things, to the professional and the controllable, "has been adequate." He paused. "The Bezoar application on your last practical was incorrect in its timing. 3 seconds earlier and the antidote would have been perfect." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "I'll fix it in the next practical." "See that you do," Snape said, and picked up his red-black quill, and Harry left the office and walked back through the castle that closed warmly around him in the amber evening dark. 3 seconds, he thought. He'd fix it. The mirror was on the 7th floor, behind a door that Harry had not previously noticed, which meant the castle had kept it from him until now and had now decided the time was right. The castle made these decisions with the patience of something that understood time at a scale Harry was only beginning to comprehend. He found it on the last night of January, late, when he couldn't sleep and the dormitory was too still and the weight of everything he'd learned in the past month was sitting on his chest in the way that significant things sit when you've processed them intellectually but not yet completely emotionally. He walked the corridors because walking the castle at night was one of the purest pleasures he'd found at Hogwarts, the building in its own darkness, not performing school, just existing, all the deep old magic of it alive and quiet and friendly to him specifically. The door was plain. The room was small. The mirror stood against the far wall, tall as a doorway, framed in tarnished gold, with an inscription along the top that Harry's progenitor sight read without difficulty. Erist stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. The mirror of Erist. I show not your face but your heart's desire. Harry stood in front of it and looked at what the mirror showed him. His mother. His father. Behind them, slightly out of focus but present and warm and real, a shape of the future, people and places he hadn't met yet and a version of the world that was different from the current one in specific ways. And at the center of all of it, himself, not older, just himself, standing in the space his life was going to make, surrounded by everything that had chosen him and everything he had chosen back. He looked at it for a while. The thing the mirror showed was not something impossible. That was the distinction. It wasn't fantasy, it was possibility. Real, available possibility, the kind that required work and time and choices made correctly. He looked at his parents' faces and thought about a letter written in small leftward-leaning handwriting on the last morning of their lives, and felt the full, complete weight of loving people he'd never met, and didn't look away from it. Then he took a breath and turned from the mirror. He didn't need what it offered. He had the direction. The mirror showed the destination. He already knew how to move. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower through the friendly dark castle, and went to sleep, and dreamed about Kieran, who finally, after 6 years of never turning around, turned around, and had a face that was not Harry's face but was the same in the ways that mattered, the set of the jaw, the quality of the attention, the absolute absence of anything that felt like fear. They stood and looked at each other across the 3,000-year distance. You know what you are now, Kieran said. I'm starting to, Harry said. That's all it takes, Kieran said. Start. Keep starting. Harry woke up with the dawn grey at the window and the castle warm around him and Crookshanks, who had evidently infiltrated the dormitory again through whatever method he used, which no one had satisfactorily explained, purring against his side. He got up. He got dressed. He went down to the room on the 7th floor that reconfigured itself and he trained for an hour, harder than usual, pushing the edge further than yesterday. Then he went to breakfast and told Hermione she had pumpkin juice on her textbook and helped Neville identify the correct plant specimen for herbology and argued with Ron about the tactical specifics of his latest chess loss, which Ron was delighted to discuss at length. Outside the great hall windows, February was beginning, cold and necessary, the world arranging itself around what was coming. Harry ate his breakfast and paid attention. Chapter 6, Progenitor. February came in hard and stayed that way, the kind of cold that had opinions about it, wind off the highlands that hit the castle's north face and wrapped around the towers and found every imperfect seal in every window frame in the building. The lake froze solid enough for third years to skate on it until McGonagall made an announcement at breakfast that was 3 sentences long and contained the phrase "the giant squid has feelings too," which Ron said was the greatest thing he'd ever heard from a professor and which Harry noted was also a genuine statement of fact. He had been feeling it since the middle of January. Not Voldemort specifically, not the cold-pressured intelligence he'd felt in the 3rd floor corridor in October, but the broader shape of something moving toward resolution. The way you feel the end of a chapter before the last sentence arrives, some quality of narrative pressure accumulating in everything simultaneously. Quirrell had been absent from the staff table 4 times in February. The ward on the 3rd floor had been tested twice, lightly, probing rather than pushing, which told Harry that whoever was directing the approach had learned something from October and was now gathering information rather than acting. Tom Riddle was patient when he needed to be. Harry respected that even as he prepared for what it meant. He told Dumbledore about the testing on a Tuesday morning and Dumbledore said he would address the Quirrell situation directly. Harry looked at him and said, "When?" and Dumbledore said, "Soon," which was the word Harry had learned to translate as "I have a timeline you're not fully aware of." He let it go. Some battles were Dumbledore's to have and some were his, and the line between them was something he'd spent the year learning to read. He spent February the way he'd spent most of the year, in class, in the 7th floor room at 5:30, in the common room with Hermione's notes spread across the table and Ron explaining chess strategy with the evangelical enthusiasm of someone whose religion has only one sacrament. Neville was getting better at herbology at a rate that was starting to alarm his other professors because the confidence he found in the greenhouses was spreading sideways into his other work, slowly and unevenly but genuinely, and Harry watched this happen with the satisfaction of seeing something that had been compressed by years of external doubt begin to find the space it actually needed. Draco found him in the library on a Wednesday evening in the 2nd week of February, which was not accidental. Draco had been organizing this approach for several days, Harry could tell, from the specific way he walked into the library and scanned the room before coming toward Harry's table with the deliberate casualness of someone who has planned exactly how to look unplanned. He sat down across from Harry without being invited, which was itself different from his usual mode. He put his books on the table. He didn't open them. "My father is coming to Hogwarts," he said. End of February. Board of Governors inspection. Harry looked at him. "Okay. He's going to want to meet you," Draco said. "He's been collecting information about you all year." "About what you are?" "He has people," he stopped. "He has sources." "I know," Harry said. Draco looked at him. "He's dangerous," he said. "Not directly, he doesn't do things directly. But he has the ear of half the ministry and he's been building relationships since the war ended with people who are waiting to see which way things fall and he's very good at positioning himself to," he paused. "He's very good at being on the right side of whatever's coming without ever being publicly on any side." "Why are you telling me this?" Harry said. Draco looked down at his books. He was 11 years old and he had a face that had been trained since birth into a specific kind of composure, the composed, superior effect of old money that treats certainty as a birthright, and underneath it something was doing something more complicated. Harry had been watching it happen all year. The gap between what Draco had been shaped to be and what Draco actually was had been widening since September, slowly, almost imperceptibly, and now it had widened enough that Draco was sitting in the library telling him things his father would not want told. "Because," Draco said, "I've been watching you all year. And I've been watching my father all my life. And he stopped again. Pressed his lips together. "You're not what I was told to expect. Not the version of you that was supposed to fit into the space my father described." He looked up. "I want to know if what you're doing, the thing you're building, or whatever it is, has room for people who are starting from the wrong place." Harry looked at him for a long moment. This was the door he'd seen at the edge of Draco's orbit all year, the one that kept being tried from the inside without quite opening. "What wrong place?" Harry said. "My family's," Draco said. "My father's politics. The blood purity things." The phrase came out with a slight distaste, as if he'd been examining it up close recently and found the examination unflattering. "I was raised to believe certain things. I don't think I believe all of them anymore. Most of them." He looked at Harry directly, which took something, visibly. "I don't know what I believe yet. But I know I don't want to inherit what my father is building." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Then don't," he said. "It's not an inheritance if you choose not to take it. It's not that simple." "No," Harry agreed. "It's that clear. Simple and clear are different things. The clear thing is, you know what you don't want. That's the beginning. He paused. Hermione and Ron and Neville are my people. They're going to be in everything I do. If you can sit at a table with Hermione without the thing your father taught you coming up in your face, we can talk. Draco looked at the table. She's better at most things than me, he said. That's annoying rather than, it's not a blood thing. I know, Harry said. Can you deal with annoying? I deal with Crabbe and Goyle daily, Draco said. I can deal with annoying. Harry almost smiled. Then we'll see, he said, which was, deliberately, the same answer Hermione had given him on the train. Draco looked at him. He caught it, he was sharp enough to catch it, and something in his face shifted into something that wasn't quite a smile either but lived in the same vicinity. My father, he said, returning. He's going to try to get information about the stone from you. Not directly. He'll frame it as interest. Concern. I know what Lucius Malfoy's interest looks like, Harry said. Thank you for the warning. Draco nodded. He opened his books. Harry opened his. They worked on opposite sides of the table in a silence that had the particular quality of an agreement reached without documentation, and Hermione, arriving 20 minutes later with an armload of references, sat down beside Harry and looked at Draco across the table and said, "Hello," in her most rigorously neutral voice. Draco said, "Granger, back." It didn't have anything on it that it shouldn't have. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at his book. She made a note on her parchment that Harry suspected was not about research. Lucius Malfoy arrived on the 22nd of February. Harry knew before he saw him because the castle told him, not in words, in the particular alertness that moved through the stones when something walked through the gates that the building had an opinion about. He felt it at breakfast, a sharpening in the ambient awareness, like a room going slightly colder. He saw Malfoy in the entrance hall at 11, between his transfiguration and charms classes. The man was tall and pale and dressed in a way that was designed to communicate wealth without appearing to try, which required considerably more effort than actually trying. He had Draco's features arranged with 10 more years of practice and a specific quality of attention that Harry recognized as belonging to people who had learned to treat every room they entered as an assessment opportunity, scanning, calculating, categorizing, all of it completely invisible behind an expression of patrician courtesy. He saw Harry and his expression didn't change at all, which told Harry that he'd known exactly where Harry would be at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. "Mr. Potter," Lucius Malfoy said. His voice was smooth and controlled, the product of education and practice, exactly the kind of voice that was designed to sound like simple conversation while carrying a great deal of additional weight in the undertones. What a genuine pleasure. Harry stopped and looked at him. He didn't offer his hand. "Mr. Malfoy. I've been hoping to meet you," Malfoy said. "Your reputation, shall we say, has preceded you." He smiled. It was a technically accomplished smile. "I've heard remarkable things." "From whom?" Harry said. A slight pause. Almost imperceptible. "Various sources. The wizarding community takes a great interest in the boy who lived." He tilted his head. "Though I understand the designation is somewhat inadequate for what you actually are." "Most designations are," Harry said. Malfoy's eyes were doing something, assessing and then assessing again, because he'd walked into this conversation with a model of an 11-year-old boy, presumably, and the thing he was actually looking at was not fitting the model and he was adjusting, continuously, on the fly. He was very good at it. Harry noted how good he was at it and factored it in. "I wanted to speak to you," Malfoy said, "about the school's current situation. The security arrangements. I sit on the Board of Governors and several concerns have been raised about the nature of what is being stored in this building and whether a school is the appropriate location for, the Philosopher's Stone is adequately protected," Harry said. Malfoy looked at him. There was a fractional shift in his expression, so small it would have been invisible to most people, that happened when someone hears something they didn't expect and have to immediately incorporate. "I see you're well informed," Malfoy said. Yes, Harry said. I also know that the Board of Governors has no authority over internal security arrangements, and that Dumbledore has final discretion over what is stored at Hogwarts. So the concern you're raising isn't something you can act on through official channels. He looked at Malfoy steadily. Which means the question of why you're raising it is interesting. Silence in the entrance hall. 2 second years passed and slowed to stare and were given the combined force of Harry's and Malfoy's attention from opposite directions and sped back up. Lucius Malfoy looked at Harry with an expression that had dropped approximately 1 layer of its professional surface. Not unmasked, a man like Lucius Malfoy never fully unmasked, but more honest, in the way that people become slightly more honest when they've decided that performance is no longer serving its purpose. You're remarkable, he said. And it was not a compliment in the way compliments are usually structured. It was an assessment. I know, Harry said. I'd like to give you some advice, Mr. Malfoy. Malfoy raised an eyebrow. Whatever he'd prepared for, it wasn't this. The thing you're serving, Harry said. Whoever you're working toward, whether it's a return to what was, or the consolidation of what is, or some future arrangement in which your family sits in a specific position. I want you to consider whether what you're building is actually what you want, or whether it's simply what you've always done and you've confused continuity with intention. Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. I'm thinking specifically, Harry said, about your son. Something happened in Lucius Malfoy's face. It was very small, buried under years of training, but Harry was not working with ordinary perception. He saw it, the one place where the complete composure was not complete. The one variable in Lucius Malfoy's calculations that was not, fully, a calculation. Draco is my concern, Malfoy said, with the edge of something real under the control. Yes, Harry said. I know he is. That's why I'm telling you. He held Malfoy's gaze. He's figuring out who he is. That's harder to do the more pressure is applied from outside. People figure themselves out better in space than in a vice. He paused. Give him some space. Lucius Malfoy stared at Harry Potter, 11 years old, standing in the entrance hall of Hogwarts with the morning light falling through the great doors behind him, the castle warm and attentive at his back, and said nothing for 4 seconds. Which, from Lucius Malfoy, was an eternity. You're unusually confident, he said finally. I know what I am, Harry said. That tends to produce confidence. He turned to go to Charms. Enjoy the inspection, Mr. Malfoy. The greenhouse section is the most interesting. He went to Charms. He was 40 seconds late and Flitwick looked at him with the expression of someone who knows exactly what was just happening in the entrance hall. Because Dumbledore's staff were generally briefed on things, Harry had established that, and said, 5 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Potter, sit down, with the specific tone of someone making a point that doesn't entirely mean what it says. Harry sat down. Hermione slid his notes across to him without looking up from her own. Quirrell disappeared from the staff table on March 4th. Not from the school immediately. Harry felt him go, felt the specific double presence, Quirrell and Riddle braided together, moving through the castle in the early hours of the morning toward the third-floor corridor. He was awake and sitting cross-legged on his bed when it happened, which was not coincidence. He'd been sleeping light for a week, one part of his awareness permanently stationed at the ward like a hand on a door. He felt Quirrell touch the ward. He felt the ward read him. Felt the intention, desperate, pressured, the shape of a man who has been occupied by something else for so long that his own desires and his host's desires have become indistinguishable. And underneath Quirrell's frantic wanting, beneath everything, the cold pure iron want of Tom Riddle. The stone. The body. The return. 60 years of obsessing about one thing, focused to a point. The ward held. Not as a barrier, it didn't stop Quirrell's body. He was through the door, through the sleeping dog, through the enchantments beneath. What the ward did was what it had been built to do, read him completely, take the full measure of his intention, and make the thing he was seeking become unreachable. The stone, in its final chamber, was there in physical fact, but Quirrell, with his particular quality of purpose, could not interact with it. His hands went through it. His spells passed through it. It existed completely and was completely unavailable to him. Harry felt the moment Quirrell understood this. Felt the panic. Felt Riddle's cold fury pressing forward as Quirrell fell back, the possession bearing down with the weight of something that has been held in a cramped space for too long and has run out of patience. He got up. He pulled on his cloak, not the invisibility cloak, his actual cloak, because he was not hiding, and went into the corridor and said to the castle, with the quality of attention the castle recognized, "I need to get there quickly." The staircases reorganized. The path to the third floor was 3 minutes instead of 10. He went through the door. Through the room with the sleeping dog, who opened one enormous eye and recognized him and closed it again. Through the trapdoor. Through the devil's snare, which parted for him without any spell, because it was castle and the castle was his. Through the key room, the chess room, the potion logic puzzle, all of them stepping aside or solving themselves, the building clearing a path like a crowd-making room. He arrived in the final chamber. Quirrell was standing at the center of the room, and he was not alone in himself. Riddle's presence had come fully forward, wearing Quirrell's body like something it had borrowed without asking, and the face turned toward Harry when Harry arrived had Quirrell's features arranged in a way that didn't belong to Quirrell. "Harry Potter," Riddle said, in Quirrell's voice but without Quirrell's stutter. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. The name landed. Riddle's borrowed face did something, not surprise, exactly, but the very specific reaction of someone hearing a thing that most people don't say to him, that most people can't say without their voice doing something that reveals their fear. Harry's voice didn't do anything except say the name. "You've been waiting for me," Riddle said. "How efficient of you." "I've been waiting for the situation to resolve," Harry said. "You coming here was always going to be the resolution." He looked at Quirrell's face with the steady attention he used for everything. "Where's Quirrell in there?" "He's present," Riddle said. "He's cooperative." "He's terrified," Harry said. "I can feel him. He made bad choices for bad reasons. He doesn't deserve what you've done to him." "Most hosts don't get to negotiate that," Riddle said. He was doing something, Harry could feel it, a probe at the edges of his awareness, Riddle testing the boundaries of what he was dealing with, calibrating. The cold intelligence working rapidly through what it was looking at. "I've been curious about you," Riddle said. "I want to say that honestly. The reports from my people were intriguing. I've read everything available on the Progenitor bloodline." "I know," Harry said. "You've been collecting documents. 3 from the Malfoy private library, 1 from a contact in the Department of Mysteries. I know because 2 of those documents were borrowed without permission and the owners noticed." Riddle's eyes, Quirrell's eyes, were very still. "You track things carefully." "I pay attention," Harry said. "What do you want, Tom?" "Not the stone specifically." "What do you actually want?" "The same thing I've always wanted," Riddle said. "To not die." Harry looked at him. He stood in the chamber with the ward around the stone humming in the room's magic, and he felt the full shape of the thing standing across from him, the fear, enormous and ancient and completely governing, that had shaped every choice this man had ever made from the moment he'd understood that he was mortal. The Horcruxes. The war. The political architecture. The body after host after instrument. All of it organized around a single, driving terror of the thing that happened to everyone. "You've been afraid of death for 60 years, Harry said. "You've destroyed your soul trying to avoid it. You've killed everyone who inconvenienced the project." He paused. "Are you happy?" Riddle looked at him. "That question is irrelevant." "It's the only relevant question," Harry said. "You have exactly what you built, which is a partial existence in a borrowed body with a shattered soul, no allies who aren't afraid of you, and a project that's consumed everything you were. Is that better than the alternative?" "The alternative is nothing," Riddle said, and his voice, still Quirrell's voice, had something in it that was neither controlled nor cold. Something much older than either of those things. You don't know that, Harry said. No one does. You're not afraid of it, Riddle said. I can feel that. How? Because I'm made of something older than the fear of it, Harry said. Because the bloodline I carry has seen 10,000 years of people being born and dying and being born again in the ways that actually matter, in the things they built and the people they shaped and the changes they made that outlasted them. Kieran died. He's been dead 3,000 years. He's still talking to me. He looked at Riddle steadily. Death isn't the end of mattering. You've organized your whole existence around the wrong premise. Riddle was silent for a moment. Something in the quality of the room changed, a shifting in the pressure of Riddle's presence, barely perceptible, the specific atmospheric change of a very controlled mind encountering something it doesn't have a prepared response for. You want me to accept death, Riddle said. I want you to stop being terrified of it, Harry said. Those are different things. And if I don't? Then I imagine this goes on longer than it needs to, Harry said. You'll rebuild. You'll come back. And every time you do, I'll be here, and I'll be more of what I am, and you'll be less of what you were. He paused. That's not a threat. It's arithmetic. Riddle looked at him for a long time. The chamber was very still. The stone was in the room, available to Harry and no one else, humming with the old alchemical patience of something that had been waiting for the right hands and had not yet found them. You're offering me a conversation, Riddle said. About death. I'm offering you the truth, Harry said. Which nobody else has bothered to give you because everyone who talks to you is afraid of you, and afraid people don't tell the truth. They tell what they think you want to hear. He looked at Riddle with the complete, steady attention that he gave everything. You are not going to live forever, Tom. But you could still decide what you spend the time on. Silence. I have Horcruxes, Riddle said. Flat. A statement of fact. I know, Harry said. I can feel them from here. 6 of them, I think, though one is unclear, the count might be 7. He watched Riddle's face. The diary in the Malfoy Manor. The ring in the Gaunt Shack. The locket. The cup. The diadem, that one's in this building, actually, and the castle knows where. And the snake. He paused. And possibly one more that I'm not certain about. Riddle's expression had gone to something very controlled and very careful. You felt them. Yes. From here. Yes. Harry watched the calculation happening. Watched Tom Riddle, the most dangerous wizard alive, run the full arithmetic of what he was standing in front of, the thing that could feel his Horcruxes across hundreds of miles of geography, that had placed a ward and avatar of his couldn't break, that had stopped 4 trained Death Eaters with one raised hand, that was 11 years old and was giving him the same look that everything gave Voldemort before it burned except that this thing was not burning. This thing was completely comfortable. What do you want? Riddle said. From me. Specifically. I want you to stop killing people, Harry said. I want you to leave. Tonight. I want you to release Quirrell, he needs medical attention, and I want to not have this conversation again for at least 2 years because I have school and other things I'm working on. He paused. And eventually, when you've thought about what I've said, I want you to consider the possibility that you've been wrong about the most important thing. Riddle stopped. That's extraordinary arrogance. It's the truth, Harry said. Arrogance is when you're wrong and confident. I'm confident because I'm right. Something moved through Riddle's face that was not any of his usual expressions. It lasted about 2 seconds and then was gone, but Harry caught it. Something that was not anger and not fear and not calculation. Something that might, in a person who'd had 60 fewer years of armoring themselves against it, have been grief. You know you can't stop what's coming, Riddle said. Even you. The forces in motion are larger than one person. They always are, Harry said. That's not the point. Riddle looked at him for the last time, looked at him with the full cold intelligence and also, somewhere underneath the intelligence, the full weight of a man who began as an unloved child in an orphanage and made every possible wrong turn available to him and had arrived here, in a borrowed body in a warded chamber, being told the truth by someone who was not afraid of him. "I'll think about what you said," Riddle said. It came out flat and might have been dismissal. Harry thought it was probably not dismissal. "Good," Harry said. He raised his hand. Not the gesture of casting, the gesture of unlocking, of releasing. He found Quirrell inside the shared presence and he found the junction, the place where Riddle had latched on, and he took hold of it with the part of him that could reach through walls and reach through miles and reach through prison wards, and he pulled. Riddle came loose from Quirrell with a sound that was not physical, a resonance in the room, high and dissonant, the sound of something that has been holding on being made to let go. Harry held the contact with Quirrell, kept the man's consciousness anchored while Riddle's presence shredded and dispersed, not destroyed. Tom Riddle was not going to be destroyed today, but separated, unhoused, sent back out into the formless state he'd occupied for 10 years before finding Quirrell. Quirrell collapsed. Harry crossed the room in 6 steps and crouched beside him. The man was alive, breathing, conscious, eyes open and full of something that was entirely his own for possibly the first time in a year. He looked at Harry with the eyes of someone surfacing. "It's over," Harry said. "You're all right." Quirrell looked at him. "I'm not," he started, and his voice broke, "all right. You made bad choices," Harry said. "People do. You're still alive, which means there's time for the next choice to be better." He pressed his palm briefly to the man's shoulder in the way he'd learned from the month after Sirius walked out of Azkaban, the gesture that said "I acknowledge you're in here and you're real," and then stood up. "Can you walk?" Harry said. "I think so," Quirrell said. "Then walk to the hospital wing," Harry said. "Madame Pomfrey will help with the immediate things. Dumbledore will deal with the rest." He helped Quirrell to his feet and watched the man make his way back through the enchantments, which Harry held open because the castle would have made it difficult otherwise. Then he stood alone in the final chamber for a moment. The stone was still there. Humming. Old. Harry looked at it. Then he picked it up, it weighed almost nothing, warm in his palm, red as Petunia's rose, and felt its nature clearly. Not evil, not good. A made thing, enormously powerful, organized toward a purpose that was neither wise nor necessary. Flamel had made something remarkable. He'd made it in response to the same fear that had eaten Tom Riddle, the fear of ending, and had managed the making better than Riddle had managed his version, but they were both responses to the same underlying wrong premise. He held it for a moment. Then he felt through the stone's nature with the awareness that was his specific instrument, found the organizing principle of it, the deep structure intention that Flamel had built into it, and he changed it. Gently. The way he'd straightened the rose, not destroying it, just redirecting it. He changed it from a thing that produced immortality for whoever possessed it, to a thing that was simply the most advanced piece of alchemical work in existence, remarkable, historical, incapable of its original purpose. The stone went cool in his hand. He put it in his pocket and went back up through the castle, which opened every door for him and moved every staircase into alignment and was warm around him in the specific way of a building expressing something that wasn't quite approval but was something adjacent to it. Dumbledore was in his office when Harry arrived. He looked up when the door opened and looked at Harry's face and then looked at his pocket, and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. "Quirrell is in the hospital wing," Harry said. "He'll need a great deal of support. Riddle is dispersed. Not gone, he'll find another way back, eventually. But not soon." Dumbledore stood up from his desk slowly, with the careful quality of someone who is making sure their legs are going to work. "The stone," he said. Harry took it from his pocket and put it on the desk. Dumbledore looked at it. He picked it up, turned it, felt it with whatever magical sense was his. His expression moved through several things. "You changed it," he said quietly. Yes, Harry said. It's still Nicholas Flamel's greatest work. It's still historically significant. It just can't do what it was made to do anymore. He paused. Which means Voldemort doesn't need to come for it. Which means it's no longer a target. Dumbledore set the stone down on the desk. He looked at Harry. He looked at the stone. He picked it up again and then put it down again, which was not a thing Harry had seen Dumbledore do before, a repetitive physical gesture of someone who is not quite sure what to do with their hands. You removed immortality from the Philosopher's Stone, Dumbledore said. I redirected the organizing principle, Harry said. The stone is still there. The alchemy is intact. The specific output is modified. Nicholas Flamel, Dumbledore said carefully, is going to have very significant feelings about this. I'll talk to him, Harry said. I'll explain. I think when he understands the full situation, the Horcruxes, what Voldemort was doing, the fact that the stone was going to be used to rebuild the specific person who started the war that killed most of what Flamel loved, I think he'll understand. He paused. He's 600 years old. He's had time to think about death. Dumbledore sat down. He looked very old in the blue morning light of his office, with the stone on the desk between them and Fawkes watching from the perch with golden, unreadable eyes. Tell me everything, Dumbledore said. Harry told him. All of it, in order, the way he reported things, precisely, without drama, including the full content of his conversation with Riddle. Dumbledore listened without speaking until Harry described saying I want you to consider the possibility that you've been wrong about the most important thing, at which point he said, very quietly, good heavens, and then said nothing else until Harry was finished. The Horcruxes, Dumbledore said, when Harry had finished. He had his hands flat on the desk and his eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance that was not any physical object. You can feel all of them. Most of them, Harry said. I've felt the diary and the ring for a while. The locket is somewhere, I'd need to spend more time locating it precisely. The cup is in the Lestrange vault. The diadem is in the castle, in the room of hidden things on the 7th floor. He paused. And there might be one more that I haven't identified. The feel of it is, unclear. Close to home, somehow. But I can't place it. Dumbledore looked at him. Something in his expression was the contained, guilty kind, the kind Harry had learned to read in his office on the 27th of December. What? Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. There is something I have not yet told you, he said. Regarding the night in Godric's Hollow. When Voldemort's curse rebounded from your mother's sacrifice. He stopped. Harry, do you know why the curse rebounded? Her protection, Harry said. The love magic. It's documented. Yes, Dumbledore said. But the rebounding of a killing curse with that level of force, it did not simply destroy Riddle's body. It shattered the Horcrux he was carrying. He paused. And when a Horcrux shatters with that force, the soul fragment it contained has to go somewhere. The blue eyes met Harry's steadily. I have believed for some time, I have not had evidence sufficient to say it, that a fragment of Riddle's soul attached itself to the only living vessel in the room. Harry looked at him. To you, Dumbledore said. To your scar. I believe the reason Riddle has been able to feel your emotions at certain moments, and you his, is because a piece of him has been, resident in you. The room was very quiet. Harry sat with this. He turned it over. He felt along his own awareness, which was the most sensitive instrument he had, down through the layers of himself, past the vast ancient progenitor power, past the simpler magic, past everything he was, looking for something that wasn't. He found it. Not where he'd expected, not in the scar, not even near the surface. It was deep, embedded in the same chamber where the progenitor trait had woken up, which explained why the progenitor awakening had broken every suppression charm. The soul fragment had been caught in the collapse, dragged up into the light and the expansion of power, and then, he looked at it carefully. It wasn't functioning. The fragment was there, had been there for 10 years, a small piece of Tom Riddle's fractured soul. But in the 6 years since the progenitor awakening, it had been, absorbed wasn't quite right. Surrounded. The ancient thing that had woken up in him had simply wrapped itself around the foreign soul fragment the way an oyster wraps itself around a grain of sand and rendered it inert. It was there. It was not dangerous. It was not connected to Riddle anymore. It's already handled, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. I beg your pardon. The fragment in me, Harry said. It's been neutralized. I think it happened when I woke up, when the progenitor trait expressed. The awakening absorbed it. It's there, but it's not connected, it's not active, it's not a Horcrux anymore. He paused. It's just an artifact. Like a scar that's healed. Dumbledore stared at him. He opened his mouth. He closed it. I should have told you sooner, Harry said. About the soul fragment. I knew something was there. I didn't know what it was until now. He looked at Dumbledore. You should have told me sooner too. Yes, Dumbledore said, very quietly. I should have. He paused. Harry. If you're right about the fragment, if it's truly inert, it means the Horcrux count is accurate. 6 external, 1 now neutralized. Which means, we need to find the remaining ones, Harry said. Systematically. Safely. Starting with the diadem, which is in this building, and then the rest in order. He looked at Dumbledore. I'll help. But we do it together, with full information shared on both sides. No decisions made without the other person's knowledge. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Agreed, he said. Completely and without reservation. Harry nodded. He stood up. He was suddenly very tired in the way that followed a significant expenditure of power, not collapse tired, just deeply physically aware of himself, of the weight of his own body, of the fact that he was 11 years old and had been up since 3 in the morning. I'm going to sleep, he said. Of course, Dumbledore said. He was still looking at Harry with the expression that had no layer of strategy in it. I will handle the Quirrell situation. And contact Nicholas. He paused. And Harry. What you did tonight, what you said to him. The conversation you attempted. That was, he stopped. It probably won't work immediately, Harry said. He's been afraid for 60 years. That doesn't untangle in one conversation. But I think it landed. He looked at the stone on the desk. I think something I said reached the part of him that hasn't been completely destroyed yet. He paused. I don't know if that's enough. But it's better than nothing. It's considerably better than nothing, Dumbledore said. Harry went to the door. He looked back once. Dumbledore was sitting at his desk in the early light with the stone on the desk in front of him and Fawkes watching from the perch and the room full of silver instruments recording the ambient magic of a moment that was, in various ways, significant. Get some sleep too, Harry said. You look tired. Dumbledore actually laughed. Quietly, genuinely, the laugh of a man who has been told an unexpected truth. Thank you, Harry, he said. I'll consider it. The end-of-year feast was very good. Gryffindor won the House Cup, which Ron treated as a personal victory and Hermione accepted as an inevitable consequence of a year well organized. Neville received special recognition from McGonagall for outstanding commitment to herbology excellence, which was not a real award in the Hogwarts tradition but which McGonagall had clearly invented specifically for this occasion, and the look on Neville's face when his name was called, complete, stunned, genuine joy, the look of someone who has been told for the first time that they are exactly right, was the best thing Harry saw that week. Draco, across the hall at the Slytherin table, caught Harry's eye at one point during the feast and nodded. Harry nodded back. It wasn't more than that. It didn't need to be. Sirius was at platform 9 3/4 when the Hogwarts Express arrived, which Harry had not been told to expect and which meant Sirius had simply shown up, which was, Harry had found, Sirius's primary method of expressing care, physical presence, unannounced, offered without ceremony. He was thinner than he'd been at Christmas but not as thin as last year, and he was standing with his hands in his pockets and the particular look of someone who is trying not to look eager and is failing completely. Harry walked up to him and said, "Hello," and Sirius said, "Hello," back, and then for a moment they just stood there on the platform with the steam from the train and the noise of reunions happening in all directions around them. "Good year?" Sirius said. "Interesting year," Harry said. "Interesting bad or interesting?" "Interesting," Harry said. "All of it interesting." Sirius looked at him with the eyes that had learned, over the course of the year, to read Harry's particular quality of understatement. "You'll tell me everything?" "Yes," Harry said. "On the way. Are you staying at Privet Drive?" "Petunia said I could," Sirius said. "She said, and these were her exact words, 'There is a spare room if you need it and I am not going to keep saying it.'" He paused. "I've decided that's enthusiastic, for Petunia." "It is," Harry agreed. They found Hermione, who was being embraced by her parents with the comprehensive thoroughness of people who have spent a year managing the fact that their daughter is at a school that has occasional reported incidents of significant magical danger, and who are extremely glad to have her back. Ron was loudly in the middle of a Weasley family situation that involved several people talking at once and a great deal of red hair. Neville was with his grandmother, who was shaking his hand with the stiff pride of someone who has decided that a handshake is adequate and then pulling him into a hug anyway. Harry stood on the platform with Sirius at his shoulder and watched it all, the arrivals and the reunions and the summer beginning, the year just completed folding itself into what had happened and becoming the foundation of what came next. He felt the shape of it. Not the immediate surface, not Quirrell in the hospital wing or the stone now locked in a Gringotts vault or the Horcruxes waiting in their distributed hiding places or Riddle dispersed and furious somewhere in the dark. But the longer shape. The thing that was building under all of it, the narrative of a world rearranging itself around something it had not encountered in 3,000 years. He was not afraid of it. He was, if he was honest, ready for it, not in the sense of being prepared for every eventuality, which was impossible, but in the sense of being himself fully and completely and therefore ready for whatever came in exactly the way that he was, which was the only readiness that actually existed. Kieran had said, "Start. Keep starting." He was starting. "Come on then," Sirius said, picking up the trunk. "Petunia said dinner at 7 and I don't know about you but I am not in the business of testing Petunia's limits in the first 3 hours. "Wise," Harry said. "I'm full of wisdom," Sirius said. "Extremely underrated quality." They walked through the barrier and into King's Cross and into the ordinary noise and light of a London summer afternoon, people and traffic and the open sky, and Harry walked through it and felt the world doing what the world did, proceeding, arranging, building toward whatever it was building toward, enormous and complicated and not finished. He walked into it without slowing down. Not afraid of anything. Just paying attention. Just beginning.